Sup, my fellas. Don't forget to leave feedback, and enjoy the story. When this guy came face to face with his old academy rival, his enemy was convinced it was game over. After all, a whole army of mercenaries had his back, ready to take him out on the spot. But they had no clue that he'd been hiding his trump card all along. He simply raised one hand, and dozens of skeletons burst from the ground instantly. Then, with a single command, he sent his undead army charging straight into battle. Among them were even skeleton archers, who within seconds filled every enemy with arrows. But when one of the mercenaries managed to chop off a skeleton's head, it simply picked it up and casually put it right back on. Seeing that, everyone froze in horror. But why was this guy so insanely powerful? Because he wasn't an ordinary mage. He was once the continent's deadliest necromancer. He raised an army of 20 million undead to wipe an entire empire off the map, the empire that doomed them all to die from the plague. To the rest of the world, he was a ruthless monster, who had to be stopped no matter the cost. But his reign came to an end at the hands of the only man he had ever truly respected, the purest knight he had ever met. He was the one who brought the legendary Necromancer's story to an end. Yet not even death could bring his story to a close. 200 years later, he opened his eyes once again. But this time, he wasn't reborn as the ruler of the dead, but as a descendant of the very hero who had once killed him. And while two maids smiled at the newborn heir, no one knew the greatest necromancer was reborn inside him. He commits to the summoning as if he still commands forbidden power. His attempt seems to answer the storm, drawing lightning through the sky. The mansion grounds erupt under the strike, as though his newborn incantation has truly reached something. 15 years pass, and the ominous beginning gives way to a calm day at the estate fountain. Now grown, Klein draws immediate attention from the household girls, who are captivated the moment they notice him. Their fascination builds as he approaches, his appearance alone enough to stir gossip. He carries himself with detached composure, used to the attention. Klein has grown into a strikingly beautiful young man, admired almost as something unreal. His cool expression only sharpens the impression that he is untouchable. The maids openly marvel at how handsome he is, treating his beauty as a daily spectacle. He remains aloof, either encouraging nor acknowledging their admiration. That calm breaks when someone suddenly declares they have found him, making Klein turn at once. A priest from the Holy Order ambushes him with holy water, denouncing him as an evil spirit. The priest, Veerman, studies Klein and briefly senses the same gaze Archimonde once had. He concludes that the old corruption is surfacing again and claims the purification was barely in time. Soaked and irritated, Klein points out that the priest is confidently chasing madness no one else can even see. Veerman insists this is no delusion, believing Archimonde's soul still lingers inside Klein's body and must be purged regularly. Klein flatly denies being Archimonde, but the priest takes that very reaction as proof. Watching the man's certainty, Klein starts to wonder if the priest is simply insane. As he walks away, he mentally writes Veerman off as a complete lunatic. The priest refuses to let him go and orders others to seize him for another forced ritual. Klein protests that he is not Archimonde and condemns the priest's cruelty, but his objections change nothing. Looking back, Klein reflects that this absurd persecution began the moment he was reborn into this world. He remembers dying, awakening in a baby's body, and accidentally blurting out Archimonde's necromancy, which made everyone treat him as a demon. Because of that mistake, he was confined young and eventually came under the control of a supposed holy priest. That priest entered his life as an imposing figure who would define years of suffering. Veerman immediately framed him not as Klein but as Archimonde, and that accusation became the start of everything. The first torment was endless prayer chanting, forcing Klein to endure relentless holy recitations. Then came freezing garlic baths, another so-called purification inflicted in the name of driving out darkness. The rituals escalated into outright torture, including being bound over flames while the priest called it holy cleansing. By Klein's account, years of abuse were simply disguised as purification rites. Now, 5 years after those ordeals, he is still living with the aftermath. His maid Erin sincerely prays for him to live as a healthy heir and descendant of heroes. Her prayer includes another holy blessing, and even that is enough to irritate Klein on reflex. He snaps and flings away the handmade party hat she prepared for him. Erin is hurt to realize he rejected something she made for him herself. Klein instantly regrets it, recognizing he lashed out emotionally and apologizing for going too far. As he moves to pick up the hat, Erin quietly explains that Priest Garrison was the one who made it. That revelation stops the apology in its tracks and changes the meaning of the whole moment. Klein freezes with the hat in hand, stunned that the hated priest was behind it. A priest addresses the young Master Klein with grave formality as the purification begins. Garrison theatrically pretends to be touched that Klein is wearing the hat he made for him. Klein bluntly ruins the moment by admitting he is not wearing it at all, instantly souring the priest's mood. Their exchange devolves into bickering, with Klein cursing the priest and the priest treating him like a demon in need of cleansing. Captain Dunkel of the Red Chariot Knight Order arrives and politely interrupts the farce to ask whether the ritual is finished. Dunkel explains that the old suspicion that Klein was Archimonde has faded, since he is already older than 10 and the Holy Order no longer finds anything wrong with him. Even as that reassurance is given, Klein keeps physically pestering Garrison, showing how little respect exists between them. Garrison immediately drops Klein and turns courteous toward Dunkel, making it clear he treats Rank far better than the boy. Klein notices the contrast and realizes Garrison is far more cooperative with a knight captain than with him, while Dunkel casually says the paperwork will take more time. As Dunkel prepares to leave, Garrison privately judges him to be politically shrewd. Before going, Garrison pauses as if to leave one last warning behind. He reminds Klein that certainty is dangerous because there is always still a chance he could be Archimonde after all. With that threat hanging in the air, the priest finally heads out. From the doorway he orders Klein to stay clean and pure until the next purification ritual on Friday, and Klein angrily tells him to leave already. Once the priest is gone, Klein is left bent over and shaken, trying to recover from the ordeal. He collapses onto a seat, cursing the pain and strain the ritual has put him through. Klein bitterly questions whether a real priest should be allowed to torment someone like this. His maid, still uncertain, timidly asks whether he might actually be Archimonde and offers him a towel. Klein firmly denies it and makes clear he hates even hearing that name. Privately, though, he admits denying it is self-protection, because confessing the truth would only invite worse torture while he is still trapped in these rituals. He reflects that ever since reincarnating, he has lived under suspicion and confinement because everyone believed Archimonde had returned in him. Frustrated, Klein laments that he thought he had finally returned to ducal life, only for the priest to keep interfering, while Dunkel suggests Garrison may simply be acting as someone else's proxy. The maid innocently asks what a proxy is, trying to follow the political implications. Dunkel considers how to explain it. He says a proxy is effectively a title reserved for the strongest figure in the Holy Order. He adds that only the dukes of House Rhineland rival such people, emphasizing how exceptional Klein's bloodline is. The maid excitedly praises the family's strength, and immediately asks another question. She wants to know which duke in Klein's family is considered the strongest. Dunkel starts to answer by praising the current 7th duke, but Klein cuts in before he can finish. When Dunkel tries to include Klein's father among the contenders, Klein rejects that outright. He states with certainty that the 1st duke is the strongest. Dunkel falls silent, surprised by the force of Klein's conviction. Trying to smooth things over, Dunkel accepts Klein's answer while the maid cheerfully misreads it as simple admiration. As she points out that Klein keeps staring at the 1st duke's portrait, Klein thinks this fixation is something far deeper than liking him. Dunkel remarks that the family was founded 200 years ago by that 1st duke, unaware of what that number means to Klein. The mention of 200 years locks Klein's attention onto the portrait. He finally forces himself to accept the truth that he, Archimonde the Necromancer, has been reborn in this era. His thoughts run through the long line of dukes that followed the founder. The memory settles on the face of the 1st duke. He recognizes him as Berkel Rhineland, the family's founder. Klein realizes with grim clarity that he was reincarnated as the descendant of the very man who killed him. A memory resurfaces of Archimonde calling Berkel's name in fury at the end of his life. He recalls Berkel's final resolve and the purpose that drove him into that battle. Berkel had fought for the future of the children, not for himself. The remembered clash ends with Berkel descending in judgment, sword in hand. Klein jolts awake from the nightmare, dragged back into the present by the force of the memory. He sits on his bed breathing hard, trying to steady himself after reliving that death. Calling it a miserable dream, he begins to frame his own past clearly. He was Archimonde, the legendary necromancer feared as the devil of the continent. He remembers that in a fit of rage he nearly destroyed the continent before everything came crashing down. In the end he was slain by Berkel Rhineland, and when he opened his eyes again, 2 centuries had passed and he had been reborn as Berkel's descendant. Klein wakes in an unfamiliar body with all his memories intact, and is still struggling to adjust to his new appearance. A priest catches him muttering in his sleep and immediately probes whether his old identity as Archimonde has resurfaced. Klein recognizes the man as Priest Garrison, a fanatic who has tortured him for years over that delusion, and realizes he must hide what he knows. He pretends his sleep talk meant nothing, but Aaron suddenly bursts in before he can smooth things over. Aaron loudly reveals that Klein was ranting in his sleep, threatening continence and issuing orders as Archimonde. As she repeats the worst of it, Klein panics and tries to shut her up before the priest takes it seriously. The interruption ends when the butler Berkman arrives with news that a swordsmanship demonstration is about to begin. Garrison seizes on the announcement, and coldly declares that Klein will need twice the usual time to prepare for the family's participation ritual. Klein forcibly silences Aaron, furious that her outburst nearly handed the priest more ammunition against him. Internally, he rejects the priest's madness and braces himself for whatever awaits outside. On the way, Klein learns that the event is a formal swordsmanship demonstration. Berkman adds that the Duke personally ordered Klein to attend this time. That surprises Klein, while Aaron remains distracted by food even as they walk. Berkman scolds her manners, but Klein lets it pass and indulges her. Aaron happily accepts the snack, briefly lightening the mood as they continue. Klein presses for the real reason his father suddenly wants him present at an event he was never invited to before. Berkman finally explains that members of the collateral branches of the family have come to visit. Klein immediately understands what that means and grows wary. When he sees them, his suspicion hardens into contempt as the visiting relatives openly treat him like a joke. They mockingly call him Archimonde and turn his disgrace into entertainment for the crowd. Klein identifies the loudest taunters as his maternal cousins, who treat his years of isolation as something to laugh about. Other distant relatives from the northern branch seem no better, more interested in indulging themselves than showing respect. His attention then shifts to the western cousins, centered around a poised blonde woman who clearly carries status. She sits apart with the confidence of someone used to being noticed and obeyed. Klein senses that she has already judged him, while she in turn dismisses him as if he is beneath even answering. When more relatives sneer at him for daring to belong to the Rhineland family, Klein finally turns to face them. He cuts through their outrage by questioning their claim to superiority in the first place. Then he coldly admits he does not even remember their names, reflecting that such bold disrespect is only possible because the family itself is weakening. Their contempt for a direct descendant confirms to him just how far the Rhineland house has fallen. The demonstration begins with Dalton attacking Deline, only for Deline to evade and counter so cleanly that Dalton is immediately thrown off balance. Humiliated, Dalton curses Deline and tries to force the fight into a real clash. He drives himself harder, refusing to accept the gap between them. Dalton demands that Deline stop holding back and face him seriously. Deline answers that the match is already decided and batters Dalton down despite his protests. Watching Deline, Klein realizes this half-brother is the family's last real pillar. He identifies Deline as the eldest son and a prodigy whose talent makes him difficult to oppose. Delane's skill is so overwhelming that the Rhineland name still survives on his reputation alone. Even so, Dalton stubbornly launches another desperate attack. Klein's eyes sharpen with unnatural focus as he studies the swordsmanship through the senses of his new body. He tracks Dalton's thrust while Deline remains perfectly composed in front of it. Deline waits until the exact instant when the attack has already committed too far to recover. Then he bursts forward in a single explosive movement that leaves Dalton startled and exposed. Klein realizes he can read the technique completely. He sees the precision in Delane's footwork. He also grasps the exact timing of the launch. Dalton senses too late that Deline is operating on a level he cannot answer. Klein goes further still, perceiving even the mana flow behind the Rhineland style. Deline finishes the exchange with Meteor Sword, a decisive technique that crashes through Dalton's defense. The bout is called on the spot, with Dalton left stunned by how completely he was beaten. Deline coolly reminds him that the one in danger was never Deline at all. As the crowd absorbs Delane's display of the Meteor Sword, the nobles recognize it as a public warning that the Rhineland family's main line still retains overwhelming strength. Klein, half dazed from the spectacle, hears the same conclusion spreading around him. The collateral branches are being reminded not to overreach. Someone suddenly calls Klein's name, pulling him out of his thoughts. He turns to find his younger brother Deline greeting him warmly, and wondering why Klein arrived without notice. Deline jokes that if he had known Klein was watching, he would have tried even harder to impress him. Klein brushes past Delane's polished self-confidence and asks the real question: why has the collateral branch come at all? As Klein suspects they may be here to squeeze the main family, a senior voice cuts in to praise Delane's achievement. The speaker is Heinkel Rhineland, the 7th Duke and head of the family, who declares that Deline has already mastered the family technique. Deline immediately goes to his father, while Klein remains apart and reflects that this man is the father of his birth family. Heinkel acknowledges Delane's effort with restrained approval, making clear whose accomplishments matter to him. Klein understands that, to Heinkel, Deline is the last proof that his pride in the family still has substance. Another knight openly marvels that Delane's mana control and precision are far beyond what someone his age should be capable of. Deline accepts the praise modestly, but the moment shifts when Heinkel calls Klein's name. Heinkel invokes the family creed that a Rhineland knight must stand above all others, repeating the final teaching of the first Duke, Berkel Rhineland. He urges Deline to engrave those words into his heart and keep advancing, and Deline gratefully accepts the charge. Only after affirming Deline does Heinkel finally turn his attention to Klein. Klein braces himself in silence, already expecting what this attention will bring. Heinkel reaches out, not with affection, but to judge him directly. The verdict is immediate and humiliating. Heinkel senses no mana in Klein at all. Klein apologizes automatically, thinking that anger and discipline are reserved for children with promise, while he is treated as a burden too worthless even to correct. A knight named Dunkel tries to soften the blow by explaining that Klein spent his formative years in a monastery. That explanation only feeds the gossip, and the surrounding nobles begin spreading the disgrace that the second son of Rhineland has no mana. The whispers escalate into open contempt, with people questioning the competence of the direct line and suggesting the collateral branches should take over the family's future. Klein tells himself he can endure insults aimed at him, but one thought keeps surfacing: Berkel believed children were the future. Remembering that ideal makes the family's present decay feel even more unbearable to him. His anger finally hardens into resolve. Klein silently condemns the ruined state of the Rhineland family, and wonders whether this is really what Berkel gave his life for. As the Duke's party moves on, Deline parts from Klein casually, leaving him alone with the humiliation. That is when Dalton Conwell, a young man from a collateral branch, steps in to mock Klein for being a Rhineland heir who cannot even wield a sword. Dalton presses harder, sneering that Klein's status as a direct descendant is the only thing keeping him above others. Klein recognizes Dalton at once and answers with a far more personal humiliation, exposing his habit of chasing women behind the family's back. Dalton is thrown off balance, and Klein coldly suggests that anyone who thought bribery could hide such behavior is either naive or stupid. Unable to answer, Dalton lashes out physically and charges in rage. Klein drops him to the floor with contemptuous ease, stunning Dalton by defeating him despite supposedly being weak. Without even turning around, Klein tells him this outburst is just bitterness because Deline already proved himself superior. Desperate to wound him back, Dalton spits out that Klein is an illegitimate child who does not even know his own mother. That insult hits the one place Klein cannot ignore, and his restraint snaps as he demands Dalton repeat it. Dalton immediately realizes he has crossed into dangerous territory. Klein's fury is not rooted in longing for the mother he never knew, but in disgust at how people like Dalton treat the direct line with cheap, inherited arrogance. In that instant, he sees just how far the family has fallen from what it was meant to be. That realization collides with a deeper, darker resentment in him toward the family of the hero who once killed him. Before the confrontation can explode, Dunkel steps in and orders Dalton to stop. Dunkel makes clear that he will not allow any more disrespect. Dalton backs down only outwardly, swallowing his anger with obvious resentment. He retreats behind a final taunt, claiming Klein is only safe because a knight is protecting him. Dalton storms off in humiliation, barking at the onlookers as he flees the scene. Watching him go, Dunkel grips his sword, ready in case the situation flares up again. Klein steadies himself, the rage still burning beneath his silence. Then he calls to Dunkel and asks for a spare sword. The scene shifts away from the ballroom to a quiet night field, where two figures stand facing a large stone as if preparing for what comes next. A servant hands Klein a sword, and the boy quietly prepares for something unusual at this late hour. When asked why he needs a blade now, Klein gives no real answer and keeps his focus on the weapon. He starts testing whether he can reproduce the way Deline handled the meteor sword earlier, treating the memory like a lesson. Klein sends the servant ahead, wanting to verify something alone, while the servant worries he is still fixated on the sword's secret. The servant reflects that Klein has no mana, which should make any dream of knighthood impossible. He also reminds himself that the meteor sword is a ducal secret, something Klein should never be able to imitate. Even so, Klein keeps replaying Delane's technique, convinced the impossible move might still be within reach. The memory of what he witnessed remains unnaturally clear, as if every detail was preserved for him. He recalls the exact footwork behind Delane's strike. He reconstructs the timing of the launch as well. Then he follows the blade's path and even the mana flow that powered it. As he pieces the technique together, strange energy begins cracking through his eye, signaling that something in him is responding. The servant senses a sudden disturbance and turns back in alarm. He recognizes the energy as something extraordinary and deeply familiar. The possibility shocks him, as if Klein may have awakened a power that should not exist in him. Klein's imitation erupts into a real strike, blasting apart the rock before him with violent force. A sharp change overtakes Klein's eye, confirming that this was more than a lucky swing. Power continues to surge around him as his body settles into the aftermath of the technique he just reproduced. The servant stares at the shattered stone, stunned that Klein truly pulled it off. Klein lowers the sword while the servant can only address him in disbelief. Klein himself is shocked, realizing his attempt actually worked. Elsewhere in the household, a red-haired girl reacts in confusion as the news or commotion reaches her. The scarred guardian understands at once that what happened is beyond ordinary explanation. To him, Klein's sudden feat is outright unbelievable. The scene shifts to a lighter moment as the household notes Klein's absurd improvement in underwater endurance, turning his training into a joke. Klein snaps back with sarcasm when the guardian suggests they may as well conduct the next purification ritual in a fish tank. Their banter continues, but the guardian admits he came because he felt an ominous aura from Klein's room earlier. Klein complains that ominous talk like that is exactly what unsettles him, just as a servant brings him a towel and formal news. The servant delivers an invitation from Lord Dalton. Klein learns it is the same Dalton who clashed with Deline at the training grounds, and is now claiming he wants to apologize. Remembering Dalton's earlier hostility, Klein immediately doubts the sincerity of that apology. He reads through the letter carefully, withholding judgment. The invitation turns out to be for a hunting competition, which only makes Dalton's sudden friendliness seem more suspicious. Klein concludes Dalton is probably using the event as a pretext to lure him out. Even so, when asked whether he will go, Klein sees no reason to refuse. He adds that he has another advantage in mind. That hidden edge is the sword technique he has learned to reproduce. By obsessively reviewing Delane's swordsmanship, Klein has come to understand what happened to him. He realizes his gift is not random instinct but a precise form of replication. Klein concludes that he can perfectly copy any technique he has seen once, though he still does not know why he possesses that ability. The servant absorbs this in silence, recognizing how dangerous and valuable such a power could be. He accepts Klein's decision and moves to prepare a carriage for the trip. The scarred guardian immediately insists on accompanying Klein, while Klein protests that this sounds like the start of another reckless scheme. The guardian reminds him that he already warned him about today. He explains that from the start he felt an ominous aura hanging over this day. Soon they set out from the estate by carriage toward the western forest. The rough road quickly makes the journey miserable. Inside the carriage, the red-haired girl turns sick from the ride while the guardian remains steady and Klein sits through it in silence. Klein grumbles that he told them not to come, though the guardian quietly offers comfort to the girl instead of arguing. Klein finally admits the western forest's harsh terrain is punishing for anyone inexperienced, explaining why the trip is hitting them so hard. An older attendant gently urges Klein to rest, but Klein remains withdrawn and unresponsive. The attendant is touched that Klein is trying to help, yet he refuses Klein's direct involvement and insists the task be given to Aaron instead. Left alone with his thoughts, Klein stares out the window in silence. He reflects that even this place has changed greatly since he last knew it. What was once a frozen field of death in his memory has, over 14 years, become green again. That contrast leaves him quietly unsettled. His thoughts turn to Burkle, confirming Klein's suspicion about the man. Before he can dwell on it further, a servant announces that they have reached their destination. They arrive at the Grand Cornwell family estate. Seeing the estate, Klein identifies it as Dalton's home. He notes how extravagantly the Cornwells live, even surpassing other powerful noble houses. To Klein, the event being held there looks like a wasteful pastime only the rich could afford. Someone calls Klein over, pulling him into the gathering. Dalton approaches with a pack of vicious hunting dogs and mocks Klein for staring so hard. He flaunts the estate's wealth and implies that his branch of the family prospered while Klein's did not. Dalton presses the insult further, sneering that Klein's years in a monastery left him ignorant of how the world works. Klein cuts through the taunting by noticing the real issue: the dogs have been deliberately starved. Pleased that Klein caught on, Dalton reveals he arranged the hunt specifically to provoke that reaction. He tells Klein to pay attention as he demonstrates his idea. Dalton releases the dogs and declares the hunt has begun. He explains that bait has been scattered across the mountain. Because starving dogs can smell food far better than humans, he expects them to race toward it uncontrollably. Dalton prepares his bow, planning to shoot the animals while they are frenzied by hunger. The dogs immediately catch the scent and surge forward. Arrows strike the running pack, dropping them mid-charge. Dalton basks in the applause, treating the slaughter as proof of his skill. Aaron timidly approaches him, while he is still reveling in the attention. Dalton recognizes her as the maid who always stays by Klein's side and invades her space with casual contempt. He degrades her and questions why Klein would keep someone like her around. When he grabs her and tries to drag her off for his own amusement, the situation turns from insult to threat. Klein intervenes at once and orders Dalton to let her go. He makes it clear that if Dalton refuses, he will break his arm. Dalton answers the warning with a swing. Klein counters immediately, landing a hard blow that stops Dalton's bravado. Dalton abandons the confrontation and jumps onto a horse. Trying to recover his pride, he shouts for Klein to follow him. Klein mounts up as well, but first orders his escort to stay behind with Aaron despite their concern. When the escort tries to insist on coming, Klein interrupts by handing over a scroll. He identifies it as a one-use signal magic scroll that can instantly send a warning when torn. Klein explains that he suspects the priest Burkle followed them here, so Dalton vanishing suddenly would mean something has gone wrong. He instructs the escort to tear the scroll immediately if that happens, since the linked crest on Klein's hand will alert him. Trusting the man with Aaron's safety, Klein rides off after Dalton. The older attendant watches in uneasy silence as Klein leaves. By the time Klein reaches the outskirts, night has fallen. He follows the forest trail on horseback, convinced Dalton cannot have gotten far. Then a voice in the dark confirms Dalton was expecting him. Dalton appears with a drawn sword and taunts Klein for arriving too late. Klein reins in and demands to know what Dalton is trying to do. His confidence falters as he notices something is badly wrong. The truth comes into view: the hunting dogs lie dead on the ground, turning Dalton's trap into something far more ominous. On the night of the competition's grand finale, the young heir is confronted before he can even begin. His rival makes clear that this is no match but an execution, and that he intends to be the one who kills him. When the heir questions the threat, the attacker coldly explains that he will be beheaded and his death reported as a message to Delane. The insult deepens as the heir's family is dismissed as a hollow name with neither legitimacy nor strength. Confident of an easy victory, the rival boasts that the heir will not even get a chance to resist. The ambush reveals itself as a family power grab, with hired killers backing the claim that the dukedom should belong to their branch instead. Archers join the trap, and the attackers sneer that the heir's only mistake was being born into a weak line. Rather than panic, the heir quietly accepts what this moment truly means. His enemy savors the scandal to come, imagining everyone mocking the fallen northern family and the heir's humiliating death. That cruelty finally stirs something dangerous in the heir. He remembers that his family's burden was carried for the sake of the children who would come after them. Instead of breaking, he laughs at the absurdity of what he is hearing. The laughter grows uncontrollable, turning the execution scene into something deeply unsettling. His rival is shaken, unable to understand why a doomed man would laugh like this. The heir begins to answer by rejecting the idea that this is merely madness. He reframes the situation as insolence from a fool who has forgotten his place before a far older power. That shift in tone finally frightens his enemy. The heir reveals his fury. His family was built with his life as the price, and he will not allow it to be mocked. Blue spectral energy erupts around him, transforming the battlefield and signaling that the prey is no longer helpless. When the rival protests that he has no mana, the heir corrects him by naming the force he uses as something else entirely. He declares that what he commands is magi, not ordinary magic. The assassins recoil as the strange power closes around them and the heir's presence becomes unrecognizable. Even his enemy is stunned by the word, realizing he may have invoked something from rumor rather than reality. With calm certainty, the heir calls upon ancient evil spirits buried by time. He raises those dead powers into the light, and binds them to his command from this moment onward. The summoned dead answer with hunger, surging forth with a single desire to devour. The rival recognizes the impossible and begins to understand that the legend may be real. Skeleton-like spirits gather around the heir in a mass of resentful dead, answering the name Archimonde. Now fully in control, the heir orders his undead servants to consume every enemy present. As the dead rise, an old memory returns to him with painful clarity. He is drawn back to a distant age steeped in blood, bones, and death. He recalls that centuries have passed since those days, yet the memory remains vivid. What lingers most is the endless overlap of darkness and the dead pressing in around him. He remembers standing above them while the voices of the dead called out to him. That old connection returns as resonance, waves, afterimages, and memories all at once. The sensation is so familiar that it feels like stepping back into a former self. Meanwhile, his enemy can only deny what he is seeing, because accepting it would mean the impossible is true. The undead continue to crowd around the heir, confirming that Archimonde is not just a story. The heir admits that Archimonde was once indeed his name. For a brief moment, the night falls eerily silent under that revelation. The onlookers repeat the name in disbelief, wondering whether the old legend had ever been more than rumor. Their confusion deepens as they stare at the skeletal beings now standing behind him. One of the undead answers with a harsh, unnatural cry, proving they are no illusion. The rival is left speechless as the situation slips beyond his control. But the men around him recover first by mocking the undead as nothing more than ridiculous boneheads. Hearing them dismiss his summons as trash catches the heir's attention more than their threats do, the attackers reassure themselves that skeletons are easy to smash, treating the dead as mere mission debris rather than a real danger. Their greed quickly returns, and they joke about taking bones home as souvenirs once the fight is over. Still trying to command the field, the rival orders his men to eliminate the undead blocking their advance. The archers obey and prepare to open a path through the summoned dead. A pale-haired young man calmly orders the ranged units to load while standing protected among looming undead. A horned commander obeys and readies a crossbow, aiming at the lone figure as if this will end the confrontation quickly. The order to fire is given, and the enemy line releases a full volley at him. Arrows rain down in overwhelming numbers, meant to erase him where he stands. Yet he remains motionless at the center of the barrage, showing no urgency to evade. He watches the incoming shots with complete confidence, already knowing they will fail. The arrows strike around him instead of piercing him, as though something unseen has intercepted them. Believing him reduced to gore, Berkeley smugly mocks him before the smoke clears. That confidence breaks the moment Berkeley realizes something is wrong. The arrows have lodged harmlessly into barriers around the target rather than into his body. The truth emerges. The undead around him formed shields and absorbed the volley for their master. He taunts them for failing to recognize what 2 centuries should have taught them about his forces. The soldiers panic as they realize those skeletons can suddenly produce shields they did not have moments ago. He coolly explains that if they insist on calling them ordinary skeletons, that misunderstanding is their mistake. Then he states the real threat plainly: his skeletons are different. Berkeley is left stunned as the battle slips outside everything he expected. The Necromancer tells Berkeley to watch carefully and orders his undead into a first defensive formation. He frames the fight as judgment, promising that those who tried to secure the north by killing him will be crushed instead, and he commands all forces to attack. With a final order to charge, he personally unleashes the assault. The skeletons surge forward in disciplined formation, no longer shambling but advancing like trained troops. Berkeley can barely process what he is seeing as his assumptions collapse. The soldiers are horrified to discover that the skeletons can run. Their officers try to hold formation, but the undead are already crashing into their line. The first men are struck down before they can recover from the shock. The battlefield turns chaotic as the skeletons slash, seize, and tear through the front ranks. Berkeley realizes the situation is spiraling out of control and curses the turn of events. While his men shout for the line to hold, the Necromancer calmly orders a second crossbow unit to encircle them. He has hidden ranged troops in the trees and commands them to lock onto targets, catching the enemy completely off guard. Those undead crossbowmen step into position and prepare to fire with practiced coordination. The soldiers finally understand they are about to be hit by a ranged attack from all sides and break into panic. He gives the order to fire without hesitation. A fresh volley streaks toward the trapped soldiers. The bolts tear into fleeing men, cutting down anyone too slow to escape. More soldiers are skewered from behind, and the retreat becomes a slaughter. Even as Berkeley fights with his sword, his men continue dying around him under the undead assault. He realizes these are nothing like the mindless skeletons he thought he understood. Seeing that reloading will only get them killed, Berkeley orders everyone to abandon their crossbows and switch to close combat. But his command is already too late, and he screams in frustration as the undead close in. Driven by anger, he commits to cutting his way through them himself. He hacks into a skeleton, venting his fury on the undead. His strike severs its head, seemingly proving that brute force can still put them down. Berkeley seizes on that success and shouts that decapitation is the answer. Before he can capitalize on it, the headless skeleton keeps moving and attacks anyway, forcing him back. Breathing hard, Berkeley is shaken that a beheaded skeleton can still fight, while the Necromancer undercuts the common belief that removing the head ends such creatures. The Necromancer reminds him that he already warned them his skeletons do not follow ordinary rules. The headless undead body staggers toward its severed skull, still fully active despite the damage. Its detached head remains animate as well, its glowing eyes still alive with intent. The skull reattaches to the body, revealing one of the key reasons Archman once conquered so much land. Berkeley is horrified to realize these magically formed bodies can reconnect their own severed parts instead of dying. The undead leader's final revelation is the most dangerous of all. His skeletons not only endure but obey commands and maneuver with tactical precision. The men panic as the undead keep returning no matter how many times they are fought off. At the center of the swarm, the white-haired young master remains composed while the monsters close in from every side. He calmly judges that this body can only handle 11 uses of his power, but decides that is enough to continue. His confidence terrifies the survivors, who can only watch him prepare to resume the slaughter. A sudden impact elsewhere interrupts the battlefield with a violent crash. In another place, laughter rises beside a fountain as a large retainer entertains a small red-haired maid. He confirms he is telling her a story from the young master's time at the monastery, and she eagerly listens. The maid finds the memory delightful, amused just imagining it, while the retainer humors her enthusiasm. Seeing her delight, he notes that she is deeply attached to the young master. She takes no offense and openly admits it without hesitation. Her admiration spills over as she insists the young master is extraordinary, while the battle narrative continues underneath her praise. Even as a wounded man gasps for life, her recollection frames the young master as gentle and considerate. Meanwhile, the fight remains brutal, with men desperately hacking at the bone creatures to survive. Her fondest proof of his kindness is simple. He once shared his cookies with her. To her, that small act confirms he is the warmest person in the world. Back in the fight, blood splashes across the young master's face as he reaches forward with cold focus. The soldiers keep cutting down attackers, but the undead continue pressing in and tearing through them. One fighter strains to block a heavy blow, barely holding his ground. He lashes out in frustration, trying to carve a path through the creatures around him. Then he freezes when one of the monsters rises again despite being struck down. Realizing ordinary attacks are useless, he concludes the only chance is to stop their regeneration. He identifies the distant caster as the true target and decides everything depends on taking him out. He charges through the horde, cutting a route toward the Necromancer. With a desperate shout, he commits to a final overhead strike aimed at the controller behind the undead. He abandons caution and resolves to kill the Necromancer outright, convinced death will end the threat whether the creatures are undead or not. His blade comes down with lethal force toward the young master. At the last instant, the young master's eye changes, revealing a hidden power. He recognizes the incoming technique through that eye the moment he sees it. Using the eye's power, he draws out the exact sword art needed to answer it. He recalls a Rainland family secret technique after seeing it only once and moves to reproduce it perfectly. The attacker realizes too late that he is facing Delane's art, a secret of the Rainland family. The copy meteor sword flashes out in a devastating purple arc. The charging man is cut apart before he can understand what happened. The young master coldly identifies him as Dalton Conwell and declares that judgment has begun. The aftermath falls silent under the night sky as the strike ends. Dalton collapses, coughing blood, while the young master stands over him and admits Dalton had been right about one thing. He explains that a necromancer's creations lose their power when the caster dies, just as Archimonde once fell because he could not overcome that weakness. He reveals that Archimonde's magic was the source of the necromantic power now in use. But the force that lets him control and survive that power is not necromancy at all, but an ability of the Rainland bloodline. He reflects that taking in his enemy's blood has only made him stronger. Now fully born into this body, he says he can no longer turn away from what he is, leaving Dalton horrified and confused. Dalton tries to ask what that means, but fear overtakes him before he can finish. His life fades out mid-question. As Dalton dies, the young master leaves him with a promise that Burkle should prepare for what is coming. He vows that he will personally rebuild the ruined family. Afterward, his awareness blurs and he stirs with a weak groan. He wakes into darkness, disoriented and unable to see where he is. As sensation returns, he notices something wrong and feels restraint against his body. He tests his limbs and discovers they are bound in place. He finally realizes he is strapped to a chair, and his confusion sharpens into alarm. Dalton wakes in confusion, only to find himself restrained before a mysterious figure who calmly confirms he is no longer among the living. The stranger identifies this realm as an afterlife created by Archimonde, a place where souls arrive after death. When Dalton questions that claim, the figure confirms it without hesitation and keeps control of the exchange. Archimonde begins judging Dalton by naming the cruelty he inflicted on dogs during life, exposing the suffering he caused. He goes further, accusing Dalton of disguising sadism as hunting and taking pleasure in tormenting helpless animals. Dalton rejects the accusation as nonsense and demands to be released, still clinging to anger instead of fear. But his outrage falters when a doubt finally reaches him and he starts reconsidering what happened. He remembers Klein cutting him down and realizes that by all rights he should have died there. As he wonders why he feels unharmed, Archimonde tells him the truth plainly. Dalton is already dead, and this place exists to return the consequences of his life. Dalton refuses to accept it and begs to be let go, but Archimonde insists that belief is irrelevant because judgment has already begun. Archimonde gathers power and makes clear that the only thing left now is punishment. He summons a pack of spectral dogs and declares that Dalton's sins have come due. Dalton's bravado collapses into panic as he realizes the threat is real. Archimonde orders him to listen, while the dogs close in like the living echo of Dalton's crimes. The beasts descend on Dalton as Archimonde frames their attack as the voices of the lives he destroyed returning to him. Dalton can do nothing but scream while Archimonde coldly tells him to remember what he made others endure. The judgment is defined with brutal clarity. This hell is not arbitrary, but the one Dalton created for himself. Dalton breaks under the pain and begs for it to stop. His pleas turn desperate as the punishment overwhelms him and strips away the last of his defiance. At the edge of collapse, he can only beg for mercy. The scene abruptly shifts back to reality, where Klein lies bloodied on the ground, tears still on his face. A white-haired young man stands over the battlefield with a sword, alive despite having been cut down. He looks down in silence, steadying himself after returning from death. Behind him, undead figures rise, and the cry of a familiar voice reaches him from the rear. The hooded priest remembers a promise he made to repay Klein for helping him. He fulfills that promise by breaking the curse that bound one of his undead servants and granting it freedom. The released undead dissolves into light, its bondage finally ended. The glowing remnants drift away, leaving Klein alone amid the fading magic. Klein watches in silence, trying to understand what he has just witnessed. He reflects that true death should have claimed him completely, and wonders why he has been brought back at all. Before he can answer that question, the hooded priest addresses him directly and reveals that he knows Klein can use necromancy. Klein is startled and immediately wonders whether the stranger witnessed everything. When Klein demands an identity, the priest refuses to give one and keeps the advantage. He adds that even if Klein were told the truth, he would not be able to grasp it, while necromantic energy spreads through the corpses around them. One of the dead mercenaries begins to stir under the priest's control. Its eye snaps open, confirming the corpses are being reanimated. More bodies rise as the priest gathers them into a new undead force. Klein recognizes the technique at once as a revival art used to control corpses. He realizes the hooded man is a necromancer, and that Dalton's failure has merely left the priest with fresh material to use. The priest's laughter carries over the mountains as he revels in the turn of events. Elsewhere, Sir Dunkel is called back by a maid who wants him to hear amusing stories about Klein's childhood. Dunkel brushes her off for the moment, distracted by something more urgent. He studies a signal magic scroll in his possession and realizes Klein should never have had an emergency item like this without reason. Remembering that Klein entered the forest with Dalton hours ago and still has not returned, Dunkel's unease hardens into suspicion. He decides he cannot wait any longer and prepares to ride out to find Klein himself. Other knights try to stop him, arguing that abandoning his post during the hunting competition would cause trouble. Dunkel pauses, but only long enough to think through what is really happening. He notices the Conwell family crest on the men blocking him and realizes they are Dalton's escorts. Understanding that they had a hidden agenda all along, Dunkel asserts his authority as Klein's escort knight and warns them not to interfere. He demands that they understand he will no longer tolerate obstruction. The opposing knights hesitate, intimidated by his resolve. Dunkel turns to Miss Aaron and explains that Klein is taking too long, so he is going to search for him immediately. He orders Aaron to return to the mansion with the priest for safety. Aaron reveals that the priest already left without a word, wearing a grave expression. That confirms Dunkel's worst fear, and he remembers Klein's warning that if the priest vanished, the signal scrolls should be torn at once. Cursing the situation, Dunkel moves to act without further delay. He realizes the priest's behavior was no coincidence, and that something has definitely happened to Klein. Dunkel tears the scroll and races off, convinced Klein is in danger. Back in the forest, Klein faces the hooded necromancer and his newly raised dead in a widening standoff. Klein knows his magic is exhausted from the earlier battle and that he cannot rely on necromancy again right now. As the undead close in, he forces himself to stay calm and think. The necromancer, aware Klein is weakening, orders his corpses forward to finish the job. He openly commands the undead to eliminate Klein. Klein answers with contempt, noting that sharing the same school of magic does not mean the priest can kill him so easily. A strange crescent star mark flares on Klein's hand, signaling another power at work. The undead swarm him from every side, trying to overwhelm him before he can act. Klein decides the priest has overplayed his hand and prepares a counterattack. The necromancer is caught off guard when Klein's confidence suddenly returns. A pillar of golden light descends, interrupting the necromancer's assault. The blast crashes into the battlefield and tears through the undead ranks around Klein. A scarred priest empowered by holy light emerges from the strike with absolute composure. He sweeps the battlefield clean and commands the dead to rest, annihilating the corpses in a single radiant assault. He reassures Klein that there is no longer any need to fear. The hooded necromancer is left stunned by the sudden arrival of such overwhelming force. The newcomer's calm response makes clear that he already knows exactly what he is facing. He identifies himself as Garrison Veerman, a proxy of the Holy Order, and announces his intervention like a formal deployment. His title marks him as one of the Church's agents, elite human weapons who obey the Pope without question. These agents are introduced as the Church's greatest assets, and the only people allowed to wield St. Gaul's holy relic. Each agent is said to possess the power of an entire fortress, and Garrison demonstrates that reputation in full. The necromancer tries to defend himself, but the holy pressure already has him on the back foot. Garrison's light tears through the battlefield again, cutting off any hope of resistance. As the necromancer recognizes what stands before him, the narration narrows to a single terrifying truth. Among the agents, the one famed for the greatest raw strength is now standing directly in front of Klein. Garrison confirms that Klein can relax because the strongest of them has arrived in person. The remaining undead still stir, but their resistance is meaningless now. Garrison advances, and the corpses are blown apart simply by the force of his movement and presence. The undead can only shriek as they are erased before reaching him. He crushes them at close range with brutal efficiency, turning the battlefield into a one-sided purge. While striking them down, he frames the slaughter as a sermon, ordering the sinners to pray. He continues the rite with cold conviction, treating execution as sacred duty. Garrison declares that he will baptize them in fire, and grants them only destruction. He calls the massacre a cleansing of sin as more undead rush in and die instantly. His power slams into the ground with enough force to shatter the field beneath him. To Garrison, this annihilation is not cruelty but mercy. He finishes the remaining corpses in a rapid series of crushing blows. Then he names the final act for what it is in his creed, judgment. Watching from the side, the necromancer is horrified that an agent of the Church has appeared and even more shaken by the scale of Garrison's power. He realizes too late that this strength is far beyond anything he expected to face. Panicking, he protests that this was never part of the arrangement, and tries to flee. Even while retreating, he cannot make sense of how the situation has spiraled so completely out of control. His mask falls away as he stumbles, exposing his fear. Garrison catches him effortlessly from behind and blocks his escape with contemptuous ease. The necromancer begs for a pause, but terror has already stripped him of all composure. Garrison ignores the plea, saying his prayer is not yet finished, and that the man should be grateful for what comes next. As the necromancer's eye bulges in panic, Garrison declares that this judgment has been bestowed upon him. Invoking the light, Garrison executes him in a single merciless blow. Klein watches the aftermath in silence as the remains fall around him. Among the debris, a strange eyeball-like object drops to the ground and draws attention. Garrison addresses Klein, making sure the young master is still conscious. The narration emphasizes that Garrison needed only a step and a charge to decide the battle. His mere presence alone had already made resistance impossible. More than 20 bodies were shredded apart on the spot under that pressure. The scene lingers on the grotesque remains left behind by his intervention. Garrison reaches toward the battlefield's residue, still focused on the traces left by the necromancy. He explains that he sensed necromantic energy, and came immediately, which is why he arrived in time to save Klein. But even after the rescue, something about the energy still feels wrong to him. He grips Klein's shoulder and studies him more closely, comparing what he senses to what he expected. Garrison concludes that the energy he felt does not seem to belong to the dead thing he just killed. Klein instantly understands the danger in that realization and recognizes that Garrison may now turn on him. He realizes that if he makes one mistake, Garrison is fully prepared to kill him on the spot. Before the tension can break, Dunkel arrives on horseback and calls out to Klein in alarm. He rushes in and demands to know whether Klein is hurt. Klein, still under Garrison's hand, turns in surprise at Dunkel's arrival. He admits inwardly that forcing necromancy through this body has pushed him past its limits. Dunkel sees Klein falter and panics at the sight. He runs straight toward Klein despite the danger. When Dunkel reaches him, Klein tells him not to shout and simply support him because his legs have given out. Once Klein is steadied, Dunkel asks the question that matters most now: where is Dalton? Klein answers without hesitation that he killed Dalton. He immediately frames it as self-defense, saying Dalton tried to kill him first. That claim detonates politically, and the reaction shifts from the battlefield to a formal hearing. At the inquiry, Count Delkin Conwell erupts in outrage at the accusation that his son tried to assassinate Klein. He insists Dalton was an honorable knight, and accuses Klein's side of slandering the dead instead of finding the real culprit. A calmer voice cuts in and redirects the room toward evidence rather than outrage. The investigator reports that Klein has not changed his testimony even under intense questioning and that there is additional proof to consider. Records show that 20 mercenaries were dispatched from the Conwell estate when Klein and Dalton disappeared, strongly suggesting Dalton was plotting something. Conwell is shaken because the evidence confirms his scheme was not fully covered up. Still, he argues that the story remains impossible because Dalton was skilled enough to join the knights while Klein supposedly could not even wield a sword. Others in the chamber support that doubt, recalling that Klein had no mana and no known combat talent, so his victory over Dalton seems absurd. Inside, Cromwell accepts that Dalton's death cannot be undone, but fears that if the attempted murder of a direct descendant is proven, he will fall with his son. He quickly changes strategy and decides to attack Klein's credibility instead of denying the plot outright. Cromwell reminds the court that Klein was born to Grand Duchess Claire and has long been surrounded by rumors, including his childhood claim that he was Archimonde. Using that history, he argues that Klein's words are unreliable and that no one should condemn Dalton based on the testimony of someone so strange. He pushes further, claiming Klein must have hired someone else to kill Dalton and is now trying to pin the crime on the dead man, until a sharp interruption cuts him off. The investigator suddenly recognizes the voice behind the interruption and realizes Klein himself is about to speak. Klein enters the chamber and announces that he has heard enough nonsense. He restates the facts directly. Dalton hired mercenaries to kill him, Klein killed Dalton in self-defense, and Priest Garrison arrived after a mysterious figure turned the mercenaries into undead. Cromwell shouts that Klein is lying, desperate to stop the narrative from settling against him. Klein turns that accusation back on him with a chilling smile, asking whether the only part Cromwell accepts as true is his claim to be Archimonde. As Cromwell recalls, Klein reveals that when he killed Dalton, he made a promise that has not yet been fulfilled. A silver-haired young master vows to rebuild his family himself and purge the parasites he blames for corrupting it. As he prepares to move against rival collateral branches, a knock interrupts him before he can begin. The late arrival announces herself with an easy apology, immediately shifting the room's attention. Leia, commander of the Blue Holy Spear Knights, enters the meeting with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Klein recognizes her from an earlier swordsmanship event and is caught off guard that she has come here at all. When her presence is questioned, the issue is framed as one tied to the Fallwyvern family, and permission for her attendance is granted. Her right to be there is justified by Dalton's past service under her knight order. With that explanation, Leia is formally accepted into the meeting despite the unease her arrival causes. She quietly fixes her attention on Klein, making it clear he is the one she came to see. Once they make eye contact, she signals that she wants a private word with him. She directly requests time alone with young Master Klein, turning the gathering into something personal. Klein is baffled by being singled out, but the request is approved for a brief moment. Dismissed to go with her, Klein can only comply while wondering what she wants. He finds her knightly high-handedness irritating, even as he follows along. Then he realizes this interruption may be useful, because someone like her would only approach him out of suspicion, interest, or as a test. Accepting the summons outwardly, he decides to treat the encounter as a chance rather than a threat. As he follows Leia out, he resolves not to retreat anymore and to turn whoever approaches him into an advantage. Leaving the chamber, he commits himself to exploiting this opening no matter who is trying to use him. Leia stops abruptly once they are alone, taking control of the pace of the exchange. She pauses as if choosing a deliberately provocative way to begin. Her first move is to address him with unsettling familiarity. Then she corners him and bluntly asks for permission to touch him, instantly putting him on the defensive. Klein is stunned by how brazen she is and struggles to tell whether she is serious. Her interest is backed by reputation. Leia Rin Fallwyvern is introduced as the eldest daughter of a powerful duke and the commander of the Blue Spear Knights. The official record of her ability paints her as a monster slayer of exceptional rank. In battle, she faces down multiple enemies alone with her spear. A flash of blue power reveals the terrifying precision behind her attacks. Her spear cuts through monsters effortlessly, confirming that her fame is earned. One report states that during a Western Forest suppression mission, she wiped out high-rank monsters by herself while protecting a civilian operation. The aftermath leaves no doubt that she can dominate a battlefield alone. Her record establishes her as someone formidable enough to investigate Klein on instinct rather than rumor. Back in the present, she orders him to keep up and follow without wasting her time. Klein obeys, but she coldly reminds him not to mistake this for family warmth because she does not consider them real relatives. Klein recalls being told that her aunt became Duke Fallwyvern's second wife, making Leia his cousin only by marriage. Since Leia is the first wife's daughter, he realizes they share no blood at all and are effectively strangers. Leia makes clear that whatever she is doing now comes from her own personal curiosity, which only deepens Klein's confusion. Before he can press her meaning, she suddenly shoves him back and seizes the initiative again. Closing the distance until he can barely think, she repeats the same request to touch him, now impossible to dismiss as casual. Klein is completely thrown by the sudden escalation and can only demand an explanation. Ignoring his protest, Leia takes his hand and begins examining it herself. She notes that his skin is too soft and unmarked for someone who supposedly lives by the sword. Klein panics internally as she handles him so intimately, while her inspection grows more analytical. Pressing the key tendons and callus points, she explains that a true swordsman's hand always reveals how it grips a weapon. Her conclusion is immediate. Despite his reputation, his hands show no sign that he has ever used a sword. That contradiction forces her to question how he could have defeated Dalton and 20 mercenaries and survived unless he relied on something else. She openly wonders whether Klein used some other kind of power. The suspicion lands hard enough that both of them freeze, realizing she may have touched the truth. Klein recovers first, masking his alarm with a smile and testing whether she is merely guessing or truly sees through him. But Leia's gaze tells him this is not idle curiosity. She is probing him like an opponent she intends to measure. Reading her silence as both challenge and warning, Klein decides the safest answer may be to meet her confidence with his own and admit that her suspicion is justified. A silver-haired boy jokingly suggests he might be Archimonde, only to be met with immediate ridicule. The blonde woman dismisses the idea outright and cuts him down as an insignificant brat pretending to be someone important. He starts to protest the insult, still trying to salvage his dignity, but the contempt hits him hard enough to leave him stunned speechless. He awkwardly hopes she misspoke, while she makes clear she meant every word and is willing to repeat it. She systematically tears him apart, saying everything about him is too small and weak for someone worthy of the Archimonde name. As he reels from the verbal blow, she concludes that he is neither Archimonde nor a swordsman capable of defeating a knight. She adds that if he truly could do that, she would reward him intimately, making the challenge sound even more absurd. He can only stare, too rattled to answer properly. His damaged state leaves him unable to think clearly, so he can only wonder in confusion why she would even offer something like that. While he is still trying to make sense of her motives, she ends the exchange and leads him inside as if nothing more needs to be said. Before entering, she pauses and decides there is one more thing he needs to hear. She begins to say that the real Archimonde would never do what he is implying. Their arrival is formally announced as they enter the gathering together. He realizes he has badly underestimated the situation, because as the family's disgraced second son, no one will easily believe his side of Dalton's death. He understands that claiming self-defense will sound hollow coming from someone the household already treats as a nuisance. A senior figure immediately demands to know what he and the woman discussed in private. Instead of answering directly, he reaches for his sword as she watches. He drives the blade down with force, turning the room's attention from words to action. The sudden move shocks the hall and puts everyone on edge at once. He points the blade toward Count Delkin Conwell, making his challenge unmistakably personal. He rejects dragging the matter out through argument and insists on settling it in the northern way. He formally demands a trial by combat. The declaration stuns the assembly, which can hardly believe he would invoke such an extreme custom. The old law is recalled. In the North, a duel can decide a verdict without restrictions on weapons or techniques. Conwell tries to slow things down by calling the demand abrupt, but the boy presses him to stop stalling and answer. He lays out his accusation plainly. Conwell's son tried to kill him, pinned the crime on him, and in the process insulted both him and his mother, though he admits only part of that grievance is true for him personally. He reveals the core of his claim. Though he bears the Klein name, his true identity is Archimonde, and he feels no attachment to the woman known as his second-life mother. When Conwell tries to interrupt, he cuts him off and demands an immediate decision. The spectators grow excited, some eager to see the old tradition revived, which only increases the pressure on Conwell. The Duke rules that if the first-generation custom has been invoked, it cannot be ignored, and he guarantees that the duel's outcome will decide the matter. He further declares that all evidence already presented will be void, making the duel the sole path to judgment. Conwell instantly sees an opening, remembering that the boy has no mana and may be far easier to kill in a sanctioned fight than in court. He agrees in principle while secretly planning to send another knight in his place to murder the boy legally. The boy reads the malice clearly and answers with open contempt, unmoved by the threat. Conwell accepts, and the duel is set for 4 days later, while the boy privately resolves that this is only the start of his larger campaign. He decides to use Conwell as the first stepping stone in proving who he really is and in crushing the Branch family's arrogance, while the blonde woman silently watches. His ambition expands beyond the duel itself. He intends to remake the entire family order. That plan is met elsewhere with immediate, furious rejection. His blonde brother bursts in, horrified that he would choose trial by combat and accusing him of recklessness. When warned that he could die, he brushes it off as something already obvious and not worth repeating. He tells his brother their father has already approved the duel, leaving the brother shaken by the fact that permission was truly granted. The brother quickly offers to fight in his place as the family's champion, trying to protect him. He reminds his brother that their family's authority rests on their father's strength, and on the brother being his acknowledged successor. Then he points out the contradiction in that offer, telling his brother to wake up to what it would really mean. Letting the heir fight instead would simply hand their enemies a lawful chance to kill the future of Rainland. He presses harder, suggesting his brother's frustration comes from being unable to act freely because of his status, while insisting this duel is necessary to change how he himself is seen. He refuses to surrender this chance, and his brother's anger gives way to a more personal memory. The brother recalls rushing in joy to see him as a newborn, remembering how happy he was to have a little brother at all. That memory returns to the very first moment he noticed the baby, beginning to explain why his concern now runs deeper than politics. A child once saw Klein as something almost holy, an angelic figure. Now his blonde brother insists their different mothers do not matter and bitterly protests that after losing Klein to the Holy Order for 7 long years, he has only just gotten him back and is already being forced into a trial by combat. He grabs Klein in desperation, trying to stop him from being taken away again. The brother steadies himself and urges Klein to listen carefully. Klein realizes the man is crying, and that grief behind his anger unsettles him. The brother resolves to keep fighting for him, but a servant interrupts to announce that Count Conwell has already named his champion. The message makes clear that the duel is moving forward whether they want it or not. Klein and his brother turn their attention to the challenger, bracing for whoever Conwell has chosen. They learn the champion is Randall, an excommunicated Imperial Knight once famous for his prowess in battle. As the doors open, the threat finally arrives. Randall's disgrace is explained by his monstrous nature rather than any lack of strength. He is known for drinking heavily, a sign of the vice tied to his downfall. His true infamy is that he becomes a violent, uncontrollable bloodlust-driven brute. The man's sheer brutality is emphasized as he gulps liquor beneath a mounted lion's head, like a beast answering another beast. Recognizing that his opponent is Rienland's young master, Randall relishes the chance to hear a noble boy scream again. Klein meets that cruelty without outward panic and keeps his composure. Before the duel, Klein receives the special sword he had requested. Its maker explains that it was forged exactly to Klein's specifications and warns him to be careful. The weapon carries a severe limitation: if it collides with a mana-infused blade, it will shatter instantly. Klein accepts the flaw as part of his plan and decides to move out at once. He enters the arena alone, carrying himself with quiet confidence despite the danger. His appearance shocks the crowd, who did not expect Lord Klein to show up in person. From the stands, Conwell and his allies greet his arrival with amused disbelief. They taunt Klein's side by pointing out that their champion is an Imperial Knight, and should be overwhelming for a manaless boy. Klein's father is pressured to replace him with another fighter, but he refuses to answer. On the field, Klein looks around and asks where his opponent is. He searches for the man he is supposed to face. Randall suddenly appears behind him, reaching for him before Klein notices. The giant lands in the arena with crushing force, making his presence impossible to ignore. Randall confirms Klein's identity, and sounds almost amused by how young he is. Klein answers with a cold stare, refusing to be intimidated. Randall immediately turns to sadistic mockery, imagining how easily he can break Klein's thin body and snap his neck. Instead of freezing, Klein abruptly darts backward, slipping away before the brute can seize him. The spectators are baffled by the move and wonder if he simply retreated in fear. Conwell's side laughs at what looks like cowardice and doubts Klein can survive the duel at all. Randall joins the mockery, deciding Klein already looks terrified. Klein denies being scared and realizes he only flinched because the sudden grab reminded him of a priest who had manhandled him before. That memory exposes how deeply that earlier abuse still affects him, and he is irritated that it made him recoil for an instant. He curses that tormentor even while the arena watches the mismatch below. Among the spectators, a blonde woman studies Klein in silence instead of dismissing him. When told they should leave because Lady Hellion will be furious if she finds them there, she brushes it off, saying she does not care about that woman and choosing to stay. Privately, she becomes intrigued enough to think that if Klein defeats the knight, she wants a reward from him herself. Back in the arena, Klein decides there is something he needs to verify first. He awkwardly frames his caution as embarrassment, claiming he has had a stiff neck lately. Then he makes the real point clear by warning Randall not to touch his shoulder, just as the brute reaches for him again. When Randall ignores that boundary, Klein drops the polite act and insults him outright for not listening. He follows with a sharper blow, saying that kind of brutish stupidity is exactly why the Empire cast Randall aside. The insult lands, and Randall's amusement hardens into murderous anger. Randall lunges to punish him, promising that the more Klein talks now, the more he will scream later. At the last instant, Klein calmly clicks something at his waist, setting his hidden plan into motion. A massive fighter is hurled down with enough force to smash into the arena floor. His impact blasts out a crater, making it clear that the clash has already reached monstrous levels of strength. As the dust settles, the brute steadies himself and realizes something is wrong. He finds only a torn piece of his opponent's clothing, confirming that Klein slipped away at the last instant. The onlookers are stunned by the shattered ground, then quickly realize Klein has vanished from the point of impact. Lord Klein rises from the crater alone, confused that his target escaped. A calm set of footsteps announces Klein's reappearance behind the chaos. Klein steps back into view with his sword ready, composed despite the overwhelming difference in raw power. He judges that meeting this monster head-on would get him torn apart, so he commits to evasion instead. Watching the giant rush him again, Klein accepts that this is not a fight he can win through direct force. The spectators can hardly believe he survived even that much, convinced one clean hit should destroy him. To those watching, Klein seems to be walking towards certain death. Klein recalls the accusation hanging over him. If he takes his place in the trial by combat, he must kill his opponents by lawful combat rather than by necromancy, and he decides to honor that line. Instead of relying on forbidden power, he resolves to fight with skill alone and launches himself back into the exchange. The giant answers with another crushing swing meant to overwhelm him through sheer momentum. Klein's eye flashes with focus as he draws on precise perception rather than brute strength. That sharpened awareness lets him read the attack a moment before it lands. He slips past the blow so cleanly that the giant's own force carries him off balance. The missed strike slams uselessly into the floor. Klein turns that opening into movement, skimming away before the brute can recover. Lord Klein immediately chains another attack down at him, refusing to let him reset the pace. As Klein avoids again, the giant mocks him for surviving only by dodging. He presses harder, taunting Klein for not using necromancy if he truly deserves his reputation. The insult escalates into open contempt, challenging whether Klein is really the famed Archimand at all. For a moment, the giant is thrown off when Klein's reaction is not fear or anger but something colder. Klein's faint response carries the sense that he has just made up his mind. Internally, he admits the simplest answer would be to end everyone here with necromancy, but he rejects that impulse as beneath the point of this trial. The giant suddenly senses something dangerous in Klein and loses his confidence. Even so, he charges again, trying to crush Klein before that unease can become a real threat. The crowd misreads Klein's movement as another easy dodge, while the giant himself starts to realize he did not actually see what happened. He understands that Klein's evasion carried a pressure he cannot explain, and that hidden menace unsettles him more than the dodge itself. What he is feeling is Klein's ominous aura beginning to leak through despite his restraint. The officials and witnesses notice the change in the giant's behavior and begin to question why Randall is suddenly rattled. Those who know Klein best fall silent, recognizing that something decisive is unfolding. Klein finally answers the taunts by promising he will not use anything like necromancy. He declares that as a Ryland, he will prove himself here with the sword alone. That vow shocks the observers, especially those who feared he would abandon restraint. The arena erupts in support as the fight transforms from desperate survival into a true contest of arms. Even the crowd that doubted him starts to embrace this as the kind of trial by combat they wanted to see. As the audience turns in Klein's favor, Randall is left brooding, unable to dismiss what he has sensed. He forces himself to rationalize it away, reminding himself that he still holds the advantage in body, mana, and physical strength. Deciding overwhelming force is the answer, he unleashes the full explosive power of an imperial swordsman. He drives every part of his body past its normal limit, turning breath, blood flow, and muscle into fuel for a killing burst. That power erupts around him as he rockets upward into a devastating attack. Randall commits to ending the duel in one overwhelming strike. Klein leaps clear of the red arc of destruction, refusing to meet it where it is strongest. With his enhanced sight, he begins reading not just the attack but the structure behind it, Randall's technique, mana output, and timing. Randall keeps swinging in a frenzy, trying to drown Klein in speed and power. But Klein now sees the entire path of every slash, down to the exact curve of the blade. Reduced to flailing at a target he cannot catch, Randall lashes out in frustration as Klein continues to evade him like an untouchable insect. The giant swordsman opens the clash with a killing strike, intent on ending the duel immediately. His blow tears into the arena with explosive force, but it fails to catch his target. Dust and debris swallow the impact site, briefly hiding what happened. As the smoke clears, the attacker realizes his opponent is no longer where he expected. He is shaken that the boy not only vanished from sight but may have understood the reach and timing of his sword almost instantly. That realization comes too late, because Klein has already moved behind him. Klein exploits the obvious weakness of a much larger body and goes straight for the exposed back. His blade carves across the man with a purple edge technique, drawing blood and turning the momentum. The spectators recognize the move at once and identify it as Meteor Sword. Even those watching closely are stunned by what Klein has just reproduced. The wounded brute screams as the strike lands cleanly. Klein stays composed, while others struggle to understand how he could know a technique he should never have learned. The crowd can barely process what they witnessed and look to their superiors for confirmation. One of them instinctively turns to the captain, hoping for an explanation. Elsewhere, the story recalls that the captain had chosen not to interfere personally. He had admitted that stepping in for personal reasons would only damage the Rainland family's standing further. Even so, his aide had pointed out that Klein, as a knight from the Empire, had no realistic chance of winning. The captain answered that Klein entered the duel to defend his late mother's honor, and that after failing him before, he had no right to stop him now. Underneath that decision was his deeper despair that he could no longer protect anything important to him. His aide tried to reassure him, insisting he need not carry that guilt alone. He then spoke of Klein with quiet certainty. The captain listened, still burdened by regret and doubt. The memory of Klein's successful counterstrike proves the point. Klein is not someone who simply loses. That conviction jolts the captain back to the present as Klein's name hangs heavily in his mind. The narration explains that Rainland swordsmanship was built to survive brutal frozen battlefields by reducing mana consumption to the absolute minimum. Its nature is compared to prey surviving against stronger beasts through efficiency rather than force. By contrast, Imperial swordsmanship is described as predation. It crushes opponents by releasing overwhelming mana all at once. Rainland's method instead resembles a small, alert creature waiting for the right opening. It endures, observes, and avoids wasting strength until the decisive moment appears. That principle is named temperance. Its essence is to strike the opponent's opening with the least mana necessary. Klein embodies that ideal, drawing maximum efficiency from minimal power. He reveals that this is how someone outside the family can still wield Rainland techniques, and that raw power is unnecessary against an opponent like this. He openly tells the larger man that skill and efficiency are enough to bring him down, which only deepens his opponent's fury. Humiliated, The brute drops any restraint and treats Klein as a pest that must be crushed. He unleashes a violent surge of red mana, transforming the duel into a contest of overwhelming force. The power floods through his body, swelling his presence and making his next attack far more dangerous. The spectators immediately recognize this escalation as his hidden technique. They explain that the burst steals the opponent's mobility, turning his power into a trap as well as a weapon. The man boasts that victory is now certain, while Klein remains outwardly calm and unreadable. Wrapped in red energy, the brute launches himself straight at Klein with a crushing punch. A bystander shouts a warning, convinced Klein is about to be overwhelmed. Klein meets the charge head-on instead of retreating, committing to a direct clash. At the instant their weapons connect, sparks erupt from Klein's blade. That impact triggers Klein's memory of being handed this sword and warned about its flaw. He remembers that any direct collision with a mana-infused weapon would cause it to break. The warning proves true as cracks race through the blade under the force of the clash. Seeing the sword fail, the brute thinks Klein has lost and mocks him for it. But Klein uses the breaking blade as part of his plan, slipping away as the enemy's red strike cuts through empty space instead of finishing him. A silver-haired boy with a glowing purple eye declares that his long-prepared means of hunting a target is finally complete. He identifies that weapon not as steel, but as something symbolized by a drifting feather. The image of a lion tied to that feather makes clear who the intended prey is. The lion notices the sign too late, as if sensing the trap closing around him. A tense stillness hangs over the arena just before the strike lands. The boy tightens his grip and commits to the finishing blow. His attack cuts through the duel with brutal finality, sending blood flying and ending any doubt about the outcome. The defeated knight's sword falls uselessly from his severed hand. An official halts the match at once. The spectators are told the duel is over, and shock replaces anticipation. One observer realizes the boy has flawlessly executed advanced swordsmanship that should have been beyond someone his age and experience. He further understands that the boy deliberately shattered his opponent's guard and struck from point-blank range with terrifying precision. In that moment, the victory is recognized as complete and overwhelming. The maimed knight finally grasps what he has lost and breaks into panicked agony. As medics rush in, the arena shifts from combat to emergency while the boy remains unmoved beside the wreckage of his opponent. The healers try to stabilize the wound, and the boy calmly asks whether the arm can simply be put back. His question is so detached that it unsettles the people treating the injured man. The healers explain that ordinary healing magic cannot restore a severed limb and that the knight will need a prosthetic instead. Hearing that, the boy coldly reflects that healing magic has barely progressed in 2 centuries, while Klein approaches him. Klein tests him, asking whether the sight of a severed arm truly leaves him feeling nothing. The boy realizes he should probably be acting like Archimonde rather than himself, and hastily adjusts. He awkwardly wonders whether he ought to pretend fear now, exposing how little genuine horror he feels. Meanwhile, Count Conwell erupts, unable to accept that Randall has lost after all the money he spent on that night. The boy reminds Count Conwell of their agreement, and demands that he admit his wrongdoing and submit to the victor's terms. Conwell refuses, raging that he has already lost both his son and his exclusive knight. Before he can finish his protest, an unseen force clamps down on him and cuts off his defiance. The boy invokes Dakin Conwell by name, turning the confrontation into something far more personal and ominous. Conwell's body locks up under the pressure, as if death itself has seized him by the throat. His anger collapses into confusion and fear as he struggles to understand what is happening. The boy uses his right as victor to issue a direct command, forcing Conwell into obedience. He orders Conwell to confess his sins before the Market of the North and kneel for forgiveness. Then he drives the command deeper with a necromantic voice that promises ruin unless Conwell bows and begs for mercy. That supernatural order overwhelms Conwell's will and leaves no room for resistance. A spectral reaper-like presence manifests behind the boy, making the source of the terror unmistakable. Conwell can only gasp as his courage gives way completely. He clenches through the fear, but the compulsion crushes what remains of his pride. At last he kneels and admits he was wrong. As Conwell bows, the narration reveals that the boy is using a dead man's voice, a soul-disturbing technique tied to necromancers. The technique's purpose becomes clear as Conwell breaks down in extreme terror and apologizes repeatedly. Reduced to tears, he begs forgiveness from the young master he had tried to disgrace. While it is noted that hearing that voice at close range would shatter anyone's mind, the onlookers can barely believe that a powerful branch family pillar has collapsed so completely. Satisfied, the boy decides this humiliation is only the beginning and raises his weapon to address everyone. He calls for the crowd's attention and announces that he is about to establish his place in the family. He formally declares himself the challenger in the trial by combat and its rightful victor. As witnesses listen, he identifies himself as the son of Grand Duchess Claire Ledalisis. He also claims the blood of Heinko Rainland, the North's strongest knight, through his second son line. He finally names himself openly as Klein Rainland, staking that identity before the entire assembly. Elsewhere, a looming figure appears in a doorway, suggesting another force is already moving in response. In a dim sanctuary, an older man prays to go where divine light cannot reach and asks protection even through pain and danger. His prayer turns toward the god of light, hinting that a hidden religious or political move is beginning alongside Klein's declaration. A church enforcer arrives with urgency, bringing troubling news to a senior cleric. He reports to Cardinal Murak that the surveillance target was attacked and that both the attackers and the target were undead, demanding confirmation of what happened. From the sanctuary floor, the scale of the crisis is laid out as the target's attack by undead threatens to expose something larger. Murak dismisses the alarm and reveals the incident was intentional, part of a broader scheme. He explains that the Empire sent a necromancer in cooperation with the Church because such monsters inspire fear and drive people toward faith. In his view, the terror caused by the undead will swell the Holy Order's influence with desperate believers. He coldly argues that reviving the Order and spreading gods will justify a small number of sacrifices. Before he can finish, Garrison violently seizes him by the throat in disgust. Garrison condemns the Holy Temple for abandoning its duty and bargaining with heretics for power. Murak panics as he realizes Garrison is no longer restraining himself. With death closing in, the Cardinal can only beg to be spared. His plea ends abruptly as Garrison crushes his head. Murak's body hangs limp while black blood spatters the sanctuary, confirming the execution. Garrison offers a bitter mockery of comfort to the man he has just killed. A new arrival, Archbishop Palamonel, walks in over the bodies and remarks that Garrison has become even bloodier than the necromancers he hunts. Palamon hints that Garrison's own corruption is far deeper than he admits. Garrison turns on him at once and demands to know whether this massacre was Palamon's doing. Palamon denies direct responsibility, saying he merely approved it, and claims he has useful information. To make his point, he presents evidence tied to the surveillance target. Garrison reacts sharply, ready to strike, but Palamon continues unfazed. Palamon explains that necromancy always leaves traces behind, and this evidence preserves one of them. He reveals the object came from the necromancer Garrison killed at the scene. The trace identifies a rare branch called soul-returning arts, the original form of necromancy that the Empire is actively researching. Garrison realizes this means the case is more serious than a simple undead attack. Palamon states the implication plainly: there were two necromancers present. He tells Garrison to listen carefully and shifts to the true target of the Church's surveillance. The target is identified as the second son of the Rainland family. Garrison braces himself as the accusation takes shape. Palamon points to the boy at the center of the family and prepares to expose him. He reveals that Klein Rainland himself is a necromancer. Elsewhere, in a storm-soaked mine, the story moves to the source of a new disturbance. Deep underground, a pickaxe strikes crystal with unusual force. A miner keeps working alone in the dark, unaware that something is about to break the routine. He pauses at a strange sound and senses a presence behind him. When he turns, fear overtakes him as he sees something impossible. A violent eruption tears through the mine, signaling a deadly outbreak. Back at the Rainland estate, a maid laments that her latest handiwork has gone terribly wrong. The disaster is only that she accidentally made a doll in the young master's likeness. Klein remains quietly absorbed in his book while the maid laughs off the resemblance, and a week passes since the trial by combat. In that week, Klein defeated Landau with the family technique, extracted Count Cornwell's confession with Dead Man's voice, and publicly announced his existence to the Branch family. He reflects that he had believed these victories would finally earn him recognition. Instead, he realizes his 15-year-old body cannot keep up with the ambitions and power he carries. The maid complains that he never plays, while Klein insists he is occupied with serious reading. She teases that a novel still counts as play, but Klein keeps his thoughts to himself. He knows the book's harmless cover is only a disguise. Inside are his own notes on anatomy, magic circuits, spell structures, and necromancy, showing he has been rebuilding his craft in secret. He calculates that his current body can summon at most 11 skeletons and admits he still lacks enough understanding of the original form of necromancy. He worries that the previous body's owner may already suspect him, so he needs more power before that danger closes in. That search gains direction when a report arrives describing sightings at the mine. The creatures in the report are identified as undead, and Klein immediately recognizes the lead as exactly what he needs. The young master volunteers to go himself, convinced that direct combat will reveal more than study alone. His superior worries about reports of casualties, but the concern does not shake his resolve. He insists he can handle it, seeing the trial by combat as a chance to confirm whether the undead there are tied to the one that attacked him before. His hope of investigating necromancy alone is immediately spoiled when Dunkel cheerfully announces he has been ordered to accompany him as protection. That night, while traveling on the mission, the young master resigns himself to the unwanted company as they rest by a campfire. Dunkel tries to lighten the mood by offering him freshly grilled meat. He awkwardly tries to start a conversation while acting like an attentive escort. The young master keeps eating and turns his attention back to work instead of small talk. He dryly points out that even the useless lump of charcoal Dunkel cooked is helping by staying still, and privately notes this mission has taught him how incompetent Dunkel is at survival skills. Dunkel accepts the insult with embarrassed good humor, unable to deny it. The young master admits he does not know how to respond to someone this hopeless, and tells Dunkel to just keep grilling. While turning the skewer, he casually reveals that enduring Dunkel is easy compared with spending more than a decade obeying the Allied Knights. That admission leaves Dunkel unusually quiet. He finally confesses that the young master never feels like an ordinary boy to him, because of his hidden sword talent and the spirit he showed in the combat trial. Pushing the thought further, Dunkel suggests he might even be the reincarnation of Archimonde. The young master immediately warns him never to say that where a priest could hear, and Dunkel hurriedly backs down. Dunkel explains that Archimonde was a demon responsible for turning countless northerners into undead, making the comparison deeply dangerous. Before the conversation can settle, a sudden surge of fire and force interrupts the camp. The blast swells violently, signaling that something unnatural has begun nearby. Dunkel first mistakes the disturbance for wind, but the young master instantly realizes it is not. He sharpens with sudden seriousness as the implication hits him. The young master snaps that Archimonde is not a subject to be spoken of lightly, his anger flaring far beyond simple irritation. Dunkel is caught off guard by the intensity of that reaction. A scream cuts through the night, ending the exchange and forcing both of them to move. The alarm spreads from the nearby town as more cries erupt in the distance. They find civilians fleeing in panic while undead pour into the streets. The creatures charge after the townspeople, turning the village into a sudden massacre. One undead lunges straight into a burst of incoming light. The young master cuts through the attackers in a single sweeping counterattack, dropping several at once. Dunkel calls out in shock as he sees the young master throw himself into the fight. The young master follows with necromantic force, impaling another undead with a glowing purple strike. Dunkel demands to know what he is doing, alarmed that he is exposing that power in public. The young master takes command without hesitation and orders Dunkel to stop questioning him and save the people. With the order given, another undead falls apart under the assault. Once the immediate danger eases, frightened villagers thank them and learn that their rescuer is the second young master of the Rainland family, a name that shocks the crowd. Ignoring the reaction, the young master presses for the real issue and asks when these undead first started appearing. As he studies the corpses, he identifies the phenomenon as reanimation magic used to revive and control bodies, and confirms it matches the same technique that attacked him in the forest. A villager explains the undead began appearing 2 months earlier, right after the Count family restricted access to the mine. Around the same time people started disappearing. When he hears that the undead are actually missing villagers, the young master is visibly shaken. A grieving man grabs him and demands to know if he truly is a Rainland. The man keeps pressing the accusation while Dunkel rushes in to pull him back from the young master. As Dunkel restrains him, the villager cries that they begged for help for 2 months and were ignored, and now the attacks have only grown worse. He points to the bodies on the ground and forces the young master to face what his intervention has cost. The accusation becomes personal when he reveals that one of the undead just cut down was his father, a man who only worked day and night in the mine. Broken by grief, he demands to know why his family and village have been made to suffer like this. The young master stands frozen under the weight of that blame. Dunkel's earlier words about Archimonde echo in his mind, merging with the villagers' suffering and his own buried associations. He starts to speak, but the words falter as something dark arises in him. Then he coldly silences the grieving man, dismissing the outburst as noise and refusing any responsibility for the tragedy. That cruel response leaves the listener stunned, as if he has just seen a terrifying side of the young master emerge. A white-haired boy rejects the accusation against him and redirects the grieving son's anger toward the true culprit. As the confrontation threatens to spiral, the boy calmly takes control and prepares to handle the undead himself. He invokes an old spiritual rite, calling on the innocent dead and vowing to guide them out of their pain. The corpses begin to stir under his power, confirming that his ritual is reaching them. He commits himself to leading the dead, not commanding them as monsters but guiding them onward. Blue flames spread over the bodies, transforming the scene from a threat into a release. The gathered onlookers can only watch as the fallen are drawn into the boy's strange rite. The dead rise as glowing spirits, no longer violent, and begin to answer his call. The spirits speak to him in a language only he seems able to understand, and he listens in silence. He quietly accepts what they tell him, as if receiving a final request. The others realize they are witnessing soul resonance, an ancient method of freeing the dead. Its appearance shocks them even more because it belongs to a long-lost technique once used during an old plague. For one mourner, the miracle becomes personal when he recognizes his father among the liberated spirits. The spirit begins to break apart, finally released from the suffering that bound him. One by one, the dead ascend into the night, leaving the living beneath a sky filled with departing souls. By the time the moon hangs over a quiet sky, the unrest has ended. With the dead put to rest, the group leaves the site behind. The black-haired young man follows the white-haired boy through the rocky night, still unsettled by what he witnessed. Along the way, they are reminded that the mine lies ahead, tying the undead incident to a larger investigation. But the young man is more concerned with the spirits' private exchange and asks what they said to the boy. The boy first downplays it, as if reluctant to reveal the full truth. He admits the spirits thanked him for helping them pass on, but there was more. What they truly wanted was vengeance, a request that deepens the mystery around their deaths. That word forces the young man to connect this moment to something the boy said before. He recalls the boy's earlier claim that he might be the reincarnation of Archimonde, the cursed figure no one should even name. Deciding he can no longer ignore it, he draws his sword and demands the truth. With the blade at his back, the boy is pressed to answer who he really is. The question triggers a memory of the child Klein Rainland being identified as the returned young master of the estate. The recollection frames his return after 7 years away and the fear that he was the cursed Archimand reborn. What made that fear take hold was the child's unnervingly empty gaze, far too dark for someone so young. The memory traces the beginning of the suspicion to a disturbing incident on the estate grounds. A dead cat was found in the kitchen, shocking the servants. Then another appeared in the garden, and another the next day, turning unease into dread. The deaths kept mounting until 7 cats had been found. Rumors spread that the cursed bloodline had surfaced again, and the household quietly settled on one suspect. Yet the boy at the center of those rumors only sat alone by the window, detached from the fear surrounding him. Even those who doubted his guilt could only argue that he seemed too young to be responsible. The memory fades back into the present night. Later, the young man notices movement and realizes the boy is awake and going somewhere alone. A lantern is lit, suggesting a secret trip rather than restless wandering. Seeing Klein leave at such an hour, the young man decides to follow him. The pursuit leads out into the wind and trees under cover of darkness. Klein carries the lantern steadily, moving with purpose. The follower keeps his weapon ready, expecting danger or deception. From a distance, he shadows Klein along a deserted path through the grounds. A crow's cry sharpens the ominous mood as the destination nears. The path opens onto the estate cemetery. The young man is startled that Klein has come to the graves in the middle of the night. Unable to see clearly through the tombstones, he hesitates and considers moving closer to learn what Klein intends. Before he can act, something catches him off guard and stops him cold. A sudden cry for the young master breaks the silence. The young master is found tending to a cluster of dead animals by the fire, calmly preparing to deal with them. When his companion demands an explanation, the boy reveals he is about to perform funeral rites for the carcasses. He identifies the cause as an infectious disease in the animals and explains that while humans are safe, beasts are not. Because the plague could spread further and scavengers might unearth the bodies, he carefully wraps them for proper disposal. His companion hesitates, worried the work will damage the boy's hands and suggesting someone else should handle it, but the boy refuses the concern. He insists that unpleasant duties do not disappear just because no one wants them. That answer leaves the older youth quietly unsettled. Later, with a blade at the boy's back, the older youth stops him and demands to know who he truly is. Instead of defending himself, the boy asks whether he remembers Berko-Rianland's teaching that a person is defined by deeds rather than blood. The question forces the other youth to recall the principle he was raised on. The boy points out that this belief once allowed a peasant to rise to captain and shaped the older youth's own devotion to his mother and family. He adds that since leaving the monastery, no one has watched him more closely than Dunkel, so Dunkel should judge him for himself. If Dunkel truly believes he serves a monster, the boy tells him to strike, trusting his actions to speak louder than suspicion. Dunkel wavers with the sword still in hand, unable to commit. He finally admits he has not reached a verdict and is not fully convinced, but he lowers the immediate threat. What he does affirm is that the one he serves is Klein, the second young master of Rainland, not the continent's rumored devil. That declaration catches Klein off guard. Klein accepts the awkward loyalty with dry amusement, and the tension between them eases. They press on into the darkness with a torch to investigate further. Inside, the light reveals a chamber littered with skulls and human remains. The two advance through the underground ruin, surrounded by bones and old mining structures. Klein notes the stench of death, and Dunkel confirms they are deep in a place full of corpses. Their fears are confirmed when several undead figures begin moving ahead, with signs that more are deeper inside. Klein immediately counts the visible enemies, judges the threat larger than it appears, and begins casting a summoning spell. Blue necromantic energy answers him, and skeletal warriors rise at his command to crush the approaching undead. Dunkel turns in shock as he realizes what Klein has just done. Without hesitation, Klein orders his summoned skeletons to charge. The summoned undead surge forward with feral speed and battle cries. The noise draws the attention of more undead deeper in the cavern, awakening the larger horde. Klein's skeletons crash into the enemy line and begin tearing through the first attackers. Even while fighting, Dunkel struggles to accept that ordinary skeletons can exist in such an unnaturally capable form, recalling others who found the same thing unbelievable. The melee intensifies as Klein's undead cut down enemy after enemy with brutal efficiency. Seeing the battlefield shift, Dunkel calls Klein to move and avoid being surrounded. A roar from deeper within warns that far more undead are closing in. Dunkel estimates roughly 40 enemies by the sound alone, and realizes they are badly outnumbered. Klein responds by casting another spell, this time targeting the fallen bodies around them. He frees the dead from their previous restraints and binds them to his own command. When Dunkel asks what he is seeing, Klein makes clear that he is turning subdued undead into reinforcements. He treats it as a practical battlefield tactic, using the enemy's dead against the enemy itself. With a new force assembled, Dunkel judges that they now at least have enough strength to resist. Another wave announces itself from the darkness before they can relax. Dunkel takes command of the retreat and formation, ordering the vanguard forward while telling Klein they are moving out at once. Ahead, a larger mass of undead blocks their path, forcing a direct breakthrough. The enemy closes in from all sides as the clash begins at point-blank range. Klein's skeletons carve a path through the horde, smashing bodies aside to open an escape route. Klein coolly directs the rear line to support the push and keep breaking through instead of stalling. Under his command, the undead allies strike with coordinated force and rip apart the opposition. The breakthrough continues as Klein's side cuts down more attackers and drives deeper through the swarm. Watching it unfold, Dunkel can barely believe that skeletons, supposedly the weakest class of undead, can move and fight with such terrifying speed. The battle ends with the pair cutting through enemies so efficiently that the fight resembles a disciplined military sweep. In the sudden quiet of the underground ruin, only the dim torchlight and settling aftermath remain. They realize they have wiped out a force far larger than themselves, leaving the chamber littered with bodies. The dark-haired fighter is shaken by how unnatural this victory feels, while the white-haired boy accepts that from here they must continue alone. The boy reminds his companion that if he truly trusts him, he must keep trusting him to the very end. As they press deeper into the ruins, both understand they have already gone dangerously far. The dark-haired man suddenly falters and coughs blood, showing the strain is catching up to him. At the same time, he hears a faint plea for death and realizes it is somehow reaching him directly. Recognizing a living human voice, he calls out into the darkness for whoever is there to answer. The only reply is the same desperate request to be killed. Following the voice, they discover rows of villagers hanging like stored materials in a hidden chamber. They understand the missing villagers were abducted and turned into raw components for reanimation magic, and some are still barely conscious enough to beg for release. Before they can act, an unseen woman addresses them as if she already knows exactly what they have found. A hooded necromancer steps forward and calmly explains that reanimation magic binds corpses into familiars, which is why it demands a large supply of suitable bodies. The white-haired boy immediately recognizes that she is speaking from the perspective of a true practitioner of necromancy. The woman reveals she never expected to encounter him in a place like this, implying a prior connection. She unveils herself as a red-haired woman named Pale and greets him with familiarity, addressing him as Lord Archimand, the devil of the continent. The name jolts the boy, forcing him into a memory he cannot ignore. A trivial image from the past surfaces first, hinting at a gentler moment tied to his old identity. The memory shifts to the day he was praised for winning a trial by combat as a young master. He recalls walking with his guardian and a small red-haired girl after that victory, on their way to meet the Duke. In that memory, he senses someone watching and begins to turn toward it. He realizes the hidden observer was the blonde girl peeking from around the corner. She had been nervously hiding from him without understanding why. The recollection gives way to a broader explanation of necromancers as people who summon souls and receive revelations from the dead. But after one catastrophic day, necromancers ceased to be mysterious scholars and became objects of terror. That terror began with Archimand, whose undead army devastated the continent on an unimaginable scale. The disaster ended only when the hero Bicker Laneland killed Archimand and stopped the war. Afterward, others tried to imitate that power, but their research never advanced beyond crude corpse reanimation. As a result, modern necromancers became little more than magicians who animate dead bodies for combat. Pale returns to the present, introducing herself as a necromancer and contrasting herself with the lesser kind standing before Archimand now. The three face each other across the frozen chamber as the confrontation settles into open hostility. The dark-haired man is confused by the title Archimand, but the boy confirms the woman is speaking seriously. Pale releases a tremendous surge of mana, proving she possesses power far beyond ordinary necromancers. The boy recognizes that the magic woven into her robe resembles the kind of soul manipulation only a handful of people should be capable of. His companion rejects her attempt to tie the boy to the infamous Archimand and demands answers at sword point. Pale dismisses his outrage with amused condescension and turns her attention back to the boy. The boy states that he can now confirm she truly is a necromancer like himself, because he felt the unfamiliar magic the moment she appeared. Pale agrees only partly, implying that although they share a title, there is a fundamental difference between them. She mocks the contradiction of a necromancer relying on a sword, as if that alone proves his understanding is incomplete. The dark-haired man cuts through her taunts and demands to know what she did to the villagers and who ordered it. Pale answers by declaring that a true necromancer does not depend on external tools at all. She defines true necromancy as dominion over souls and death itself, and begins casting with that principle. Her spell seizes the hanging villagers at once, turning their trapped lives into fuel for her demonstration. One victim convulses in agony as the magic tears through him. The suffering spreads from body to body as their life and soul are violently extracted. Their screams merge into a single mass of death energy gathering above her hand. With cold satisfaction, Pale tells them she will show them what true necromancy really means. She condenses the stolen death into a blazing black-red sphere and presents it as the essence of authentic necromantic power. The ritual culminates as that power begins taking physical form, clawing its way into the world. The necromancer rages that the life's work she devoted everything to is being challenged as her monstrous creation descends into the battlefield. Her stitched abomination crashes down with overwhelming force, announcing itself as a new threat. The two men facing it immediately realize they are dealing with something far beyond ordinary monsters. The dark-haired fighter recognizes the creature as something he never encountered even in war and begins identifying it. He confirms the horror is a cyclops, while the red-haired necromancer stands proudly beside her towering masterpiece. Treating the monster like a beloved pet, she apologizes for restraining it and asks it for a favor. Her request is simple and cruel. She orders it to pulp the two men. The Cyclops obeys at once, launching its attack with brutal speed. Its massive body surges toward them so fast that the battlefield tilts instantly in its favor. The dark-haired swordsman is alarmed by how quickly the monster closes the distance. As the Cyclops bears down on them, Dunkel throws himself in front of the blonde youth and warns that the young master is in danger. The blonde boy reaches out, startled by the title Dunkel just used for him. The dark-haired fighter catches that strange form of address and hesitates for a split second. He repeats the title in confusion, trying to understand why Dunkel is suddenly calling the blonde boy his master. Before anyone can sort it out, Dunkel is forced to shield the blonde youth from the monster's blow. The Cyclops slams Dunkel away with crushing force, proving how badly outmatched they are in direct combat. The blonde youth remains kneeling amid the impact, calm in a way that feels unnatural under the circumstances. Though bloodied, he says nothing and simply watches. The Cyclops lumbers toward him again, intent on finishing the job. Even seated and wounded, the blonde youth faces the monster without panic. The creature raises its bulk to crush him outright. A blade suddenly cuts into the monster's body before it can land the blow. Dunkel re-enters the fight in fury, swearing the creature will not touch the young master. He hurls himself onto the Cyclops and attacks with reckless devotion, turning his own body into a shield. The blonde youth recognizes Dunkel by name, surprised by the intensity of his loyalty. The Necromancer notices that reaction and begins to suspect a deeper connection between them. The Cyclops counters by smashing Dunkel down and trying to crush him under its weight. The dark-haired fighter sees the exchange and is caught off guard by how desperate the battle has become. Meanwhile, the Necromancer praises Dunkel's strike with mocking amusement rather than concern. She points out that even a strong blow means nothing against her creation's true design. As the monster's severed leg regenerates, she boasts that no one can even scratch her masterpiece in any meaningful way. The Cyclops swings again, fully restored and still dominant. Watching Dunkel risk himself for someone with no mana at all, the dark-haired fighter is shaken by the young master's willingness to protect him. That realization hardens his resolve, and he charges the monster head-on. He bitterly rejects his earlier suspicion that such a selfless person could be Archimonde. Determined to repay that shame, he attacks the Cyclops with everything he has. The monster roars under the assault but refuses to fall. He vows to stake his life on protecting the young master, and keeps striking despite the odds. Yet the Cyclops' flesh keeps knitting itself back together as fast as he can damage it. He realizes in frustration that the regeneration is starting again, and that brute force alone will never kill it. Another heavy impact throws his attack off balance. Even so, he keeps driving blows into the monster's body, searching for a weakness. He rains down repeated strikes, forcing the Cyclops to stagger but not collapse. Concluding that only the head might matter, he commits to a decisive finishing strike. He swings with a full-throated effort, betting everything on that single blow. His blade tears through the Cyclops' head. He follows through, carving the monster apart with sheer momentum. The severed mass crashes down, seemingly confirming the kill. A final impact pulverizes the head and scatters it. But the effort leaves him smashed into the cavern wall, nearly spent. He drops hard among the rubble, paying for the attack with his own body. He lies battered on the ground, barely able to move. The Necromancer, far from despairing, is deeply impressed by what she has witnessed. She reflects that her obsession with necromancy and countless experiments had pushed her knowledge beyond the accepted limits. In her mind, that obsession culminated in a unique Cyclops no one else could reproduce or defeat. Because of that, she had been absolutely certain of her superiority. Now she convinces herself that what she is seeing must be innate talent rather than learned skill. She exults that not even Archimonde could have created something like this, and takes the moment as proof of her own genius. In her frenzy, she declares that she truly possesses the talent she always craved. She goes further and proclaims that she has surpassed Archimonde's knowledge itself. At that moment, the blonde youth quietly identifies the hidden principle behind the monster's construction, the core connection point. He states that this moving core is the first key to synthesizing a Cyclops. He adds that the second key is the core suture, the pathway that transmits formulas and binds the corpses into one body. He explains that this is why severed limbs regrow, and that attacking the body directly is pointless because only destroying the core matters. Then he asks the crucial question of where that core is located. The answer is that a Cyclops core never stays fixed in one place. Because that core is directly tied to the creature's death, it constantly wanders through the body like blood through veins. The Necromancer smugly concludes that this makes the core impossible to find. She reminds them again that this is the masterpiece she spent her life creating. From her perspective, talent has rendered everyone else insignificant. Confident of victory, she orders the Cyclops to crush the blonde youth. The monster lunges toward him, but he only repeats her word talent as if testing it. That word triggers buried memories of a past life in which he slaughtered countless Cyclopes with effortless precision. The old sensation returns to him with perfect clarity, as vivid as if no time had passed at all. Acting on instinct rather than calculation, he moves and simply says that he just did it. The Necromancer is stunned before she can understand what he means. A violet arc flashes through the battlefield, too fast for her to follow. The slash cuts through the Cyclops and intersects the wandering core at exactly the right instant. The core shatters in a burst of light, ending the monster in a single stroke. The Necromancer can only stare as her life's work is destroyed by something she cannot comprehend. The blonde youth looks down on her and coldly suggests that if this was her life's masterpiece, she should try making necromancy a hobby in her next life instead. His faint smile makes the insult even more devastating. As death closes in on her, the story compares dying to falling asleep and being released from the burdens of life. The necromancer's eyes begin to close as if she is slipping into that final sleep. But just before she can disappear, something interrupts the process. She feels herself splash into an unfamiliar black expanse instead of passing on. Looking up, she finds herself in a strange void lined with towering black coffins. A voice tells her she is awake in the place beyond the world where souls arrive. A dark armored figure appears and calmly names it for her, the afterlife. She rejects the claim and demands to be released at once. The figure answers that her desire to leave only proves she still does not understand what is happening. He announces that what begins now is the judgment of her sins. The words strike her with fear because they carry an authority she cannot dismiss. Then he invokes the name Archimonde. That name shocks her, because Archimonde is both the foundational figure of necromancy and a historical calamity she knows well. She recalls the legends of the monarch who created an unprecedented army of death and commanded countless undead. The figure before her is revealed as that very being, the king of necromancers, calling her closer. She is dragged toward him against her will, unable to resist. As her body moves on its own, he addresses her directly as Necromancer Pale. He begins listing her crimes, turning innocent people into experimental subjects. He continues with the rest of her atrocities, accusing her of kidnapping, torturing, and binding them so they could not even die. Pale tries to deny it, but panic is already breaking her composure. She clings to the belief that Archimonde died 200 years ago and therefore cannot truly be here. He dismisses that excuse and adds that she even used the dead themselves as tools. Having finished the indictment, he prepares to decide her fate. His sentence is not simple death but something worse. From now on, she will become his tool. The coffins around them respond as if the verdict has already been accepted. Pale desperately begs for an explanation, suddenly terrified of what that sentence implies. She repeats the words "become your tool" in disbelief, realizing death is no longer the end she expected. A coffin opens and drags her toward it as she screams. Her panic turns into outright horror when she understands she is being entombed alive. Even as she begs, Archimonde asks whether she is truly afraid of dying. He assures her that death is not what awaits her. Promising they will meet again soon, he seals the judgment and leaves her to her fate. Pale breaks down completely, weeping as the terror finally overwhelms her pride. Back in the mine, Dunko regains awareness and wonders if what he experienced was real. He convinces himself the vision was only a dream and rejoices that he is still alive. The dark-haired fighter is equally stunned to find himself alive after everything that happened. He can hardly believe that only Pale's severed head somehow survived the battle. The blonde youth simply hums, as if the answer is obvious to him alone. Dunko realizes he blacked out and now sees that the young master somehow resolved the entire disaster alone. The blonde youth casually tells Dunko to begin, while Pale's head can only stare in confusion at what is about to happen. Pale finally erupts, demanding to know what happened and why she has been reduced to this state. The blonde youth asks whether she is finally ready to understand her situation. He makes it clear that by now she should have realized exactly how powerless she is. That forces her into a moment of shaken silence before a new realization dawns. Hearing the same presence again, she recognizes the voice from the afterlife. She identifies Archimonde and hears the chilling reminder that they have indeed met again. At last she understands the vision was real, and that the rumors about Klein Reinhardt were true. She blurts out that he is Archimonde, only to be silenced before she can say more. The blonde youth hushes her, making it clear that he wants obedience, not revelation. He says he needs information and prepares to extract it. His questions are precise and strategic. Who sent her north? How many others there are? Where they were sent? And for what purpose? He offers her a painless death if she cooperates, but threatens her with eternal life if she refuses. Pale immediately grasps the horror of that threat, asking if eternal life means remaining in this mutilated state. He confirms that it does, and that it would last forever. To break her resistance, he coldly suggests testing how long she can endure that fate without even crying. While Dunko records the confession, the dark-haired fighter watches in uneasy silence. Dunko reports that he has written down everything Pale revealed under questioning. Satisfied, the blonde youth decides they are done here and prepares to leave the mine. Pale panics and begs not to be abandoned, suddenly desperate for any mercy at all. Dunko reminds the blonde youth that she already obeyed and gave them everything they asked for. The blonde youth remembers his earlier promise and smiles as if he is about to grant her wish. When he says he did promise to kill her, Pale is relieved enough to thank him and beg for death at last. He assures her that he keeps his promises, but the magic gathering in his hand suggests a crueler interpretation. Instead of ending her, he restores her severed head just enough to keep her alive. Then he tells her to hold out for about a week, revealing that her death will not come quickly. The sound of skittering fills the mine as a new threat approaches. A swarm of insects pours toward her, and he calmly explains that they will handle killing her. Pale can only stare in fresh horror as the swarm closes in and she realizes what his mercy truly means. A red-haired girl is overwhelmed by cockroaches crawling over her face and body as she desperately tries to drive them away. Her panic worsens when the swarm bites into her, and the pain becomes unbearable. A silver-haired young man calmly thanks her, revealing that her suffering is serving his purpose. He makes it explicit that she has become his tool, while she can only scream in terror. Elsewhere, someone cries out to Archmond as the silver-haired youth walks through a mine with a larger companion, already moving on from the incident. The story shifts to the Rainland estate, where the consequences of the mine disaster are being reviewed. The lord of the estate studies a report in silence, weighing the implications. He learns that the Empire used necromancers in the north, and that the Holy Order ignored it, then demands to know whether the report is true. Klein confirms the account without hesitation. He explains that about 50 undead remained in the mine along with test subjects, and that many more civilians had already vanished there, suggesting the threat extends beyond one site, while politics delayed any response. The Lord immediately orders the Night Order to investigate every location Klein named and to request reinforcements from the border if necessary. After taking action, he praises Klein for exposing the truth. Klein downplays the achievement as mere luck and admits the estate is suppressing the necromancy issue for now because the situation has become too complicated. Privately, Klein worries that this plan only works if Dunkel keeps quiet, since necromancy is forbidden in the estate. The Lord rises and decides to reward him directly. He reveals that he had planned to test Klein further, but no longer sees the need. As proof of his trust, he presents Klein with the token of a Rainland Knight. The Lord appoints him an apprentice knight, though he admits even that may be too small a reward for what Klein has done. Klein accepts with satisfaction, seeing the promotion as more than enough. The Lord pauses, quietly measuring the ambition behind Klein's reaction. He ends the meeting by sending Klein away to rest, and Klein respectfully addresses him as father before leaving. Once Klein is gone, the room falls quiet and the matter is not yet over. The butler points out how extraordinary Klein's feat was, surviving dozens of regular undead, giant undead, and even an armed necromancer in a confined mine, then is ordered to send a letter. The Lord tells him to write to his brother, and say that the genius he has sought all his life is finally here. Unaware of that praise, Klein walks away through the estate with new status and growing confidence. He mocks the idea of himself as an apprentice knight, already treating the title as a stepping stone. He reminds himself that the knight's quarters are a restricted military zone, inaccessible without permission, even to someone like Priest Garrison. That restriction reassures him that Garrison should be occupied with ritual purification and unable to confront him again soon. With the Rainland insignia on his chest, Klein renews his vow to restore the family to its former glory, just as he swore when he killed Dalton. Now that he has secured his first advancement, he starts thinking about his next move. His planning is cut short when Erin suddenly crashes into him and knocks him flat. Still reeling, he jokes about her barging in over cookies, while she blurts out urgent news before he can recover. Erin snaps that cookies are not the issue, making clear this interruption is serious. Klein tries to brush her off and send her to the kitchen instead. The moment she says Priest Garrison is here right now, Klein freezes. His body stops mid-step as the danger instantly becomes real. He falls silent, realizing his assumption about Garrison was completely wrong. A violent memory flashes back of Garrison's overwhelming strength and the bloodshed Klein witnessed before. That memory sharpens into the image of Garrison's brutal hand and expression, reminding Klein exactly what kind of man is after him. Then Garrison appears behind him in the present, casually asking whether Klein's mission went well and turning Klein's fear into immediate panic. Klein understands at once that Garrison came specifically for him, and has been waiting. Garrison addresses him formally as young Master Klein Rainland, making it clear this is personal and deliberate. Soon the estate is in an uproar as servants begin searching for Klein. The search spreads into the forest, with people calling for him to come out. The searchers compare notes, and realize he has vanished without a trace. They worry because this is the crucial time for his purification ritual, while Klein secretly hides above them in a tree and listens. When they call out that Garrison will forgive him if he comes down, Klein refuses to believe it for a second. He remembers that Garrison made the same promise before humiliating him by hanging him up naked, so he knows forgiveness is a lie. As the search party moves to check around the mansion instead, Klein stays hidden and silently begs them to leave him alone. Night settles over the estate, leaving Klein concealed in the darkness as the pursuit continues. A silver-haired boy dozes alone in a tree deep in the forest at night. He jolts awake in confusion, momentarily thinking of Garrison before realizing no one is there. Looking up at the moonlit sky, he realizes he must have fallen asleep while hiding. He decides the search for him should be over by now and starts to climb down to head back. Before he can move far, something below makes him freeze in alarm. He discovers northern grizzly bears circling the tree and understands he is trapped. The beasts are identified as apex predators of the north, vicious and eager to hunt. Their claws are made to tear flesh apart, making them especially deadly at close range. Without necromancy to protect him, he knows he would be easy prey and can only wait them out. As the cold worsens, he curses the northern weather and tries to endure it. His thoughts drift to the life he lost, remembering how he gave everything for the northerners who died unjustly. He bitterly recalls being reborn into the family of the man who killed him. Even in this new life, he sees himself as still fleeing danger and persecution. He pulls into himself with a weary sigh, worn down by the memory and the cold. He remembers the mob that once hunted him down, shouting for Archimonde to be seized. That memory sharpens into the accusation that he was a cursed child. Back in the present, the freezing night leaves him feeling close to collapse. His consciousness starts to fade as the cold overtakes him. When he comes to, he finds himself being carried away from the tree by Garrison. Garrison confirms he is awake and in his care. The boy briefly wonders if he died, but Garrison dryly explains he is simply taking him back after finding him unconscious. When the boy worries about the bears, Garrison reveals he already dealt with them. Still feverish and resentful, the boy would rather be left to die than accept Garrison's help, but Garrison orders him to stay still. Unable to understand the rescue, the boy asks why Garrison saved him when abandoning him would have meant death anyway. He presses the point, admitting he believed Garrison wanted him dead more than anyone. Garrison answers indirectly, saying a star does not create the darkness around it. He continues that a star simply shines where it is, separating a light from the evil surrounding it. He explains that children are the same, too young to truly know right from wrong. From that belief, he concludes that no one has the right to cut off a young life and its future. The boy is left stunned by hearing mercy from the man he feared most. He starts to challenge whether Garrison should be saying such things after all he put him through, but hesitates. Garrison adds a warning that if this child ever chooses to become darkness himself, then the judgment will change. The boy listens in tense silence, realizing the kindness comes with a condition. A dead branch creaks overhead, underscoring the fragile stillness between them. Garrison makes the condition explicit: if the boy turns evil, he must be prepared to face him. He vows that if that happens, he will kill him with his own hands. Later, in a brighter room, Garrison greets him formally as young Lord Klein, as if resuming ordinary order after the night's rescue. Klein answers cautiously, recognizing Garrison and sensing this visit carries more than courtesy. Garrison explains he has returned from urgent business with the order and brought back something important from an old friend. That something is a cross-shaped device meant to detect ectoplasm. The moment Klein sees it react, he realizes it may be responding to his demonic energy. Garrison begins recounting the official story that a necromancer attacked Klein in the forest. He describes the hooded attacker, as if laying out the evidence plainly. Then he states that he personally killed that necromancer, but the device revealed a problem with that explanation. According to its reading, there were not one but two necromantic traces at the scene. Klein keeps his voice steady, but inwardly he can hear danger closing in. After everything he has survived, his instincts recognize this as a serious threat. His intuition screams that Archimonde's identity is on the verge of being exposed to Garrison. As he weighs whether he could fight, copy Garrison's techniques, or survive a confrontation at all, he realizes he is nowhere near ready to face him. A scarred priest flatly rejects any hesitation and orders Archimonde to perform necromancy at once. When Archimonde questions him, the priest frames it as a final chance to preserve the family's honor, while hinting he could overlook ordinary corpse control but not true soul-manipulating necromancy. As he thinks it through, the priest realizes Archimonde may be using the original, forbidden form of necromancy tied to a man he already knows. Archimonde understands the implication immediately. If that suspicion is true, the priest intends to kill him. The threat triggers Archimonde's memory of being condemned as someone who deserved to die. Instead of breaking, he bitterly recalls that the priest once disguised cruelty as purification and now has no right to judge him. He presses further, noting the priest sounds just like someone from his past who spoke about protecting children. That old phrase once meant nothing to him, but now he finally understands the kind of righteousness it was used to justify. He recognizes it as a belief that young lives and their potential may be destroyed in the name of justice. Archimonde makes clear the priest's hostility is not personal hatred but obedience to that merciless creed, which visibly unsettles him. Drawing on the memory of his own death, Archimonde admits he once fell because he was weak. But now he refuses to stay crushed by that weakness. He strips away the pretense and forces the truth into the open. If he uses necromancy, the priest will kill him anyway. So Archimonde declares that he will choose what he becomes for himself, and will not run anymore. The priest falls silent for a moment, then accepts that he must act. He decides to use force before necromancy can be invoked. The priest launches a sudden charge straight at Archimonde. Archimonde realizes he only needs to evade once to create an opening. He commits to that plan and moves into the attack. At the last instant, he focuses on the priest's incoming strike with desperate precision. He resolves to pull it off just this one time. Archimonde slips past the blow instead of taking it head-on. The priest is caught off guard when his attack fails to land. Archimonde realizes his dodge worked and gains a burst of confidence. The priest's attack crashes into the floor with enough force to shatter it and spray blood from the impact zone. The violence sends the nearby onlookers into panic. Servants and attendants struggle to understand why the priest has turned on the young lord. Seeing the priest momentarily occupied, Archimonde reaches for the next step of his plan. Then he notices something is wrong before he can complete it. The priest reveals he has already taken control of the situation by drawing a sword and confronting Archimonde with it. Archimonde is startled to realize the weapon he expected to use is no longer where it should be. The missing sword has already been seized and repositioned by the priest. With practiced skill, the priest swings the blade in a wide arc that forces Archimonde back. Archimonde finally understands that this necromancer was prepared to fight like a swordsman from the start. The priest confirms the point through action. He fully intends to kill Archimonde here without relying on necromancy at all. Another crushing strike comes down before Archimonde can recover. Yet Archimonde remains composed, as if this danger is exactly what he was waiting for. A massive blast suddenly erupts and engulfs the priest's position. The explosion tears through the hall, blasting apart walls and furniture. Debris rains through the chamber as the entire room is thrown into chaos. Bystanders are hurled into terror while the priest is caught in the destruction. Smoke and dust swallow the scene, leaving only coughing and confusion. Even through the wreckage, the priest stays standing and orders the guards to move in immediately. As he regains his bearings, he turns toward the new threat. A swordsman arrives beside Archimonde and coolly asks whether the garrison can explain what just happened. He identifies himself as Heinkel Rhineland, the 7th Duke of the Rhineland family, and warns that his blade will speak first if necessary. The priest recognizes him at once and understands this intervention changes everything. Archimonde quietly confirms that this is the outcome he expected. With Heinkel's appearance, Archimonde sees that his plan is unfolding exactly as intended. As armed forces rush to respond, the confrontation expands from a private execution into an open standoff. As chaos erupts, the guards rush to shield the Duke and the young master from a threat nearby. One of the men suddenly recognizes something alarming and freezes mid-response. A white-haired observer realizes the knight's instinct for bloodshed is being deliberately provoked, and that if this continues even a little longer, both Heinkel and the Rhineland knights will lose control. Garrison, the black-clad agent at the center of the confrontation, is identified as the true opposing force. The Duke steps forward and directly demands to know why Garrison was trying to attack Klein. Garrison answers by invoking the young master's use of necromancy, making clear he sees that act itself as justification. The Duke counters that outside the Holy Kingdom, necromancy is not even forbidden by law. Garrison presses harder, insisting the Duke above all should understand what that accusation will do to the young master's life. The Duke reveals that his son has already endured 7 years of baseless suspicion, and he refuses to let that stigma continue. He makes his position absolute. As Klein's father, he will no longer allow Garrison to touch him. Garrison warns that unless the Duke stops treating Rhineland as an enemy and suppresses his bloodlust, matters will worsen. Instead of calming the situation, that warning pushes the Duke into open, almost manic hostility, while the others realize how dangerous his state has become. Garrison shifts into the language of faith, urging the Duke not to feel shame and to trust divine judgment over the words of unbelievers. The Duke fully gives himself over to fanatic conviction and declares that a heretic deserves no mercy. Golden power erupts from him as he launches his attack. Wrapped in blazing divine force, the Duke hardens his resolve and prepares to crush Garrison personally. His eyes show that reason has nearly vanished beneath zeal. The knights try to intervene, warning that approaching him carelessly now would be suicidal. Garrison studies the power gathering before him and recognizes the threat for what it is. The white-haired youth reaches the same conclusion at once. Everyone is now in serious danger. The building itself begins to crack under the pressure of the unleashed power. As red energy flares around him, the Duke warns that the mansion is collapsing and tells everyone to get out. Even while being hurled through the air by the force, Garrison remains in the fight. The Duke gives one final warning, ordering Garrison to lower his fists before this goes any further. Garrison refuses and frames his attack as holy punishment upon Rhineland. He drives his foot down and channels that judgment into the ground. The impact detonates through the floor in a violent shockwave. The Duke answers immediately, drawing his red blade for a decisive counterattack. He unleashes a sweeping crimson slash. The arc tears across the space with enough force to carve through the collapsing hall. Garrison bursts forward through the attack, using speed and momentum to close the distance. He meets the incoming power head-on with a glowing strike of his own. The clash explodes and sends him crashing away into the structure. Debris and fragments scatter as the impact tears through the interior. Garrison is driven along the wall and forced back, but he still does not yield. He gathers divine power into his fist and prepares a finishing blow called Strike of Condemnation. The white-haired youth sees the attack coming, and the Duke also senses the danger in time. The Duke's focus sharpens as he commits to a stronger answer. He invokes the Rhineland family's secret technique, Meteor Sword, second form. Power condenses to a blinding point in his gaze and blade. Their techniques collide in a massive flash that overwhelms the room. Caught in the aftermath, people nearby are battered by the blast as the struggle spirals beyond control. The white-haired youth tries to stop the escalation, realizing the situation has become too tangled and dangerous to continue by force. A small voice suddenly cuts through the chaos and begs them to stop. A little girl runs directly between the combatants, pleading for the fight to end. Her reckless intervention shocks the Duke, Garrison, and the white-haired youth alike into immediate alarm. The black-haired young master finally understands who has appeared. He recognizes her as Erin and urgently shouts for her to get away before she is caught in the danger. Erin, standing in the middle of the destruction, is confronted over why she came there at all. Then the young master reaches toward Garrison and addresses him with a revelation that stops the moment cold. Father Garrison. Erin reminds her father that he promised to bring her back a present, pressing him with innocent certainty. The request catches Klein off guard, and even the nearby adults are momentarily thrown by how ordinary her demand is in the middle of the tension. The white-haired young master also freezes, unsure how to process such a mundane interruption. Erin insists the promise was real and keeps pushing until her father finally remembers what she means. With awkward seriousness, he recites the bakery name she had in mind, making it obvious he is trying hard to satisfy her. Accepting that he did make the promise, he reaches for what he brought. He hands Erin cookies from a famous bakery, and her attention shifts instantly from the conflict to the treat. She happily starts eating, completely absorbed in enjoying the gift. Her delight is immediate and sincere, and for a moment the atmosphere softens around her simple happiness. Still eating, Erin asks about her father's own father, pulling the conversation toward the past. He reveals he grew up in a place of deprivation and imprisonment, where even water and food were scarce, and the companions of his youth died before reaching adulthood. He names the source of that suffering as the Archimonde cult, startling the others. Klein realizes he has no memory of such a group and is left wondering what kind of enemy this is. Erin's father explains that the cult destroyed his life and stole his friends, so he has resolved to wipe it out even at the cost of his own life. Erin quietly addresses him, drawing his attention back from vengeance to her. He gently asks her to understand and support his path, admitting that revenge is all he believes he can still do. Before leaving, he turns his warning toward Klein and promises their next meeting will not end so mildly. He walks away after making clear that this encounter was only a postponement, not peace. The room falls into a tense silence as everyone watches him depart, and the immediate danger finally recedes. Klein lets out a breath, relieved to have survived the confrontation. He immediately recognizes how dangerous it was to provoke Garrison Bierkman and vows not to repeat that mistake. At the same time, he understands the threat is now permanent, because Bierkman fully intends to return and kill him, turning this into a hunt that will end only when one of them dies. Erin abruptly offers Klein some of her cookie, startling him out of his grim thoughts. Remembering her fondness for sweets, Klein decides to indulge her and sends her off to get a strawberry cake instead. Promised the entire cake, Erin runs off in ecstatic triumph, leaving Klein with a brief moment of absurd normalcy. Watching her go, Klein feels how her carefree joy makes the surrounding life and death struggles seem strangely hollow. But he quickly refocuses and reminds himself that one major obstacle still remains. That obstacle steps forward when Heinkel Rhineland tells him they need to speak in private. The scene shifts to a quieter room where the confrontation becomes personal rather than public. Heinkel directly asks whether Klein learned necromancy, and Klein confirms that he did. Heinkel reacts with anger and disbelief, demanding to know why Klein embraced the very power tied to his years of suffering. He presses further, unable to understand how Klein managed to learn it at all. Klein offers a convenient explanation, claiming he found it in books kept in his mother Claire's annex. Heinkel immediately senses that this answer is false, even if he does not call it out outright. Klein drops the pretense of innocence and admits necromancy was his only means of survival, framing the lie as merely the most believable excuse. When Heinkel argues there must have been another path through swordsmanship alone, Klein flatly rejects that idea. He reminds Heinkel of Dunkel's report and reveals the core of his limitation: he has no mana. Because of that, he says, ordinary martial talent could never have carried him through what he faced. Klein explains that an Empire-level necromancer was secretly preying on the family, and he accepted becoming something dangerous himself because he saw no other way to stop the collapse and revive the house. He openly offers himself as Rhineland's necromancer and forces Heinkel to make a choice. Klein sharpens the challenge by saying that if Heinkel truly believes he is not Archimonde reborn, then he must decide whether to use him. The alternative, Klein makes clear, is to let the family fall into ruin. Instead of answering immediately, Heinkel turns to the moment Klein first returned to the duchy. He recalls that first meeting, when the boy stood before the household after years of imprisonment. He remembers that even after 7 years in the Correctional Institute, Klein had still come back and addressed him as father. What moves Heinkel most is that Klein did so without any visible resentment. The memory of Klein calling himself home to his father exposes the depth of what Heinkel has been carrying. Klein realizes Heinkel has been haunted by his own failure as a parent, and is stunned that this guilt has endured for so long. Heinkel admits he had thought Klein's calmness came from the exhilaration of newfound freedom, and says that now he has neither the right nor the reason to stop him. As Heinkel addresses him again, Klein is left bracing for what this acceptance will mean next. A powerful noble grants permission without resistance, signaling that the next move will proceed on his terms. In the Grand Hall, the smaller subordinate stands before the towering Duke as their quiet exchange settles into a formal decision. The Duke decides it is time to meet Klein and orders that he be brought before him. He calls for Leia to carry out the task. Leia accepts the order at once, addressing him with full deference as Grand Duke Hellion. Her obedience closes the audience, and the scene shifts away from the palace command. Elsewhere in the city, sudden danger erupts in the night before anyone can prepare for it. A violent blast tears through the street, throwing people into panic and scattering the mercenaries. From the wreckage, a hulking figure with glowing red eyes emerges like a nightmare made real. The surviving fighters realize in horror that even hired swords are nowhere near enough to stop him. The attacker confirms their fear by appearing less like a man than an unstoppable beast. One desperate mercenary abandons caution and charges anyway, choosing a suicidal attack over helpless waiting. He throws himself at the monster with lethal intent, trying to end the threat in one strike. His blade lands, but the wound means almost nothing against the creature's monstrous body. The monster answers with a sweeping counterattack that crushes the assault and sends bodies flying. A wounded survivor flees in terror as the slaughter turns into a rout. The monster casually picks up a chunk of stone, treating the battlefield like a toy. He hurls it with brutal force, cutting down another fleeing man in an instant. After the kill, he pauses only long enough to savor his own power. He openly revels in the violence, making clear that he enjoys this massacre. Nearby, two children cower as debris crashes down around them. The older child clings to the younger and admits she is terrified and does not want them to die. Seeing them, the monster lifts a massive slab overhead as if answering their plea with execution. He mockingly tells the children not to cry, turning comfort into cruelty. Promising it will end soon, he prepares to crush them where they sit. He closes in with complete confidence, certain no one can interfere. At the last moment, Leia descends into the street and places herself between the monster and the children. She strikes immediately with a spear, forcing his attack off course before the slab can kill them. Her expression stays cold and focused, showing she came to fight rather than negotiate. The children brace beneath the falling debris, still caught in the danger she interrupted. Leia drives the monster back with a rapid follow-up, carving space between him and the children. Without taking her eyes off the enemy, she orders the children to move to safety. They obey and retreat together, leaving Leia alone to hold the line. The monster immediately retaliates, swinging down at her with overwhelming force. Leia answers by unleashing a straight, brilliant surge of power to meet the blow head-on. The clash detonates between them, but she keeps advancing through the impact instead of yielding. Even as she moves, Leia remains unnervingly composed, as if calculating beyond the exchange itself. A sharp change flashes in her eye, signaling that she has seen an opening or triggered an ability. A burst of blue light erupts above, interrupting the flow of battle and drawing both sides' attention. The monster catches the attack with brute strength, grinning as the force cracks against him. He recognizes Leia as a worthy opponent and fixes on her with predatory interest. Praising her strength, he attacks again with even greater enthusiasm, treating the fight as entertainment. Leia's weapon bites into his hand and arm, proving she can injure him despite his monstrous durability. She twists free and resets her stance while he recoils, the momentum finally shifting away from his easy dominance. Leia tightens her grip and commits to a decisive counter, her focus narrowing to a single finishing move. She slams her power into the ground, releasing a concentrated shock that blasts him backward. The monster is hurled away and actually hurt, his body buckling under the impact. Instead of fear, he responds with delighted laughter, admitting that her attack genuinely managed to sting him. As the air cracks with gathering energy, a new force begins to manifest above the battlefield. A radiant sword descends from the light, promising that the fight is about to escalate beyond their current clash. A battered figure jolts into awareness, sensing something is wrong. A violent surge of power erupts through the area, blasting debris outward as the transformed man crashes down with a weapon in hand. The shockwave tears through the surroundings and leaves the scene in chaotic motion. The monster-like man coughs up blood but answers the damage with a vicious grin, showing he is still dangerous. As dust settles over the ruined ground, someone approaches the devastation instead of fleeing it. Rhea arrives with guards, confronting the hulking attacker who has smashed through the building. Her side notes this is the third such rampage this month, linking the outbreak to sudden superhuman strength and a growing pattern. The evidence now includes the same strange veins reported by witnesses, confirming these incidents share a common cause. The raging man boasts that anyone can gain overwhelming strength if they possess a certain thing, hinting at a hidden source behind the transformations. He pushes the claim further by saying that source can create power beyond even Archimonde of 2 centuries ago. Before he can say more, Rhea strikes decisively. She dismisses his comparison as nonsense, insists no one could surpass Archimonde, and resolves to uncover the truth herself. Rhea commits to investigating the mysterious source rather than arguing with a man. Elsewhere, cleanup begins, and an exhausted worker takes a brief breath amid the wreckage. The damaged mansion is swarming with servants and laborers trying to restore order after the disaster. Some reassure themselves that they survived with relatively little loss, though others are too shaken to accept that lightly. They credit the Duke's barrier for saving the mansion from total destruction and continue hauling rubble from the ruined hall. Gossip spreads that Aaron may have rushed in to stop the blast, but the claim sounds too absurd to believe. The servants dismiss the idea that someone as small as Aaron could have made any difference. Aaron passes by carrying books, quietly pleased and letting the rumors slide without correcting anyone. She heads to Klein's room to deliver what he asked for. Aaron brings the books to the young master, interrupting him while he studies alone. Klein looks up, mildly curious about what she wants. Aaron hesitates, unsure how to explain herself. She blurts out a clumsy line she thinks sounds flattering, trying to say he should not spend all his time alone with books. Klein realizes she picked that up from overheard talk about a romance novel, and dryly tells her to bring that kind of book next time if she wants him to read it. He adds that he may soon be too busy for distractions, since a week has passed since the clash between the garrison and Bjerkman. He reflects that the mansion was nearly destroyed and that Aaron's intervention was the reason he survived. Even so, he decides there is one real benefit to take from the crisis. More books arrive, including medical and anatomy texts, while Aaron immediately worries about the fairy tale book she wanted him to read. Klein compares his current freedom to his past life as Archimand, when he had to serve in the magic tower just to learn a single formula. Back then, even obtaining one torn grimoire page required schemes and theft. That pursuit of knowledge merely cost him his fingers when he was caught. He remembers a world where knowledge was restricted to mages and nobles, and recognizes how different things are now. Now he can simply take books into his hands without fighting for access. He confirms to himself that he can study whatever he wants, and quickly notices that modern understanding of circulation and blood vessels has advanced far beyond what he knew. Realizing 200 years of discoveries are open to him, he feels genuine excitement for the first time since reincarnating. He throws himself into absorbing everything at once, startling Aaron and the servant delivering the books. In the middle of his rush to study, something catches Klein's attention. A book labeled with Little Rhineland's name stands out to him immediately. The name triggers recognition, but before he can follow the thought, he is interrupted. The servant asks why Klein is gathering so many anatomy books and what strange paper he is working on. Klein casually explains that the paper is a spirit construction formula. Neither the servant nor Aaron understands the term, so Klein reminds them of the skeleton he summoned before. He begins demonstrating, spreading a prepared substance over the magic formula. Then he channels demonic energy into the setup to activate it. Aaron immediately notices that something unusual is happening. Klein explains that his necromancy works in 2 stages. First, he forms a contract with a soul through demonic energy. Then he uses that soul's mana to build a spirit body. Aaron is fascinated as Klein adds that most souls cannot sustain anything more complex than a skeleton. He clarifies that such beings are only simple mana constructs, because most souls lack either the mana or the stable ego needed to support a stronger form. Klein explains that ordinary animated corpses can imitate simple orders and fight like soldiers, but their usefulness has limits. Against true knights or skilled mages, they would be worthless, which is why he had to personally handle Dalton. His companion presses the real issue by asking what happens if the soul involved is not an ordinary one. The possibility raised is far more dangerous, a soul that once belonged to a knight with overwhelming mana. That implication unsettles the listener, who realizes Klein may be considering something extreme. Klein casually reassures him that he is not planning to create such a servant anytime soon, noting that souls of that caliber are exceptionally rare. He adds that he has no immediate need for one, treating the matter as a distant possibility. The conversation is interrupted when a butler arrives with an invitation from Paul Wyvern. The message is marked urgent, and Klein immediately connects Paul Wyvern to Lala's family. He recalls that Lala once promised him her support if he won their duel, though he had nearly forgotten the offer. While Klein struggles to remember why the summons matters, his aide questions why an urgent call from a young lady would outweigh one from the Duke. The butler clarifies that the invitation came specifically from Lady Hellion. That name changes the mood, because Hellion belongs to a collateral branch tied to people they distrust, making her invitation suspicious. Even so, the butler reminds them that she is Duke Heinkel's elder sister and the mistress of Paul Wyvern, someone too important to refuse lightly. Klein decides at once that he will go. Privately, he realizes the summons gives him the perfect excuse to pursue a plan he had been postponing. He settles on that decision with a knowing smile, now intent on acting. That night, he slips out while the red-haired girl sleeps, careful not to wake her. Her sleepy muttering only confirms she remains oblivious as he leaves with a lantern. Under the full moon, he heads into the night alone. His quiet footsteps mark a deliberate approach toward a hidden destination. His target is the resting place of Little Rhineland, the 6th Duke of the Rhineland family. Klein recalls Little's legend. Heinkel's father, once hailed as the continent's strongest knight after the first, who died tragically on the battlefield. Seeing the mausoleum, Klein resolves that this ancestor's soul must become his. He arrives before the sealed tomb, guarded by towering statues and old prestige. Without hesitation, he opens the entrance and lets himself inside. The interior reveals a vast burial hall lined with graves and memorials to the dead Rhineland nobles. He moves deeper through the crypt, searching among the tombs. As he senses the graves, he finds that most of the souls here have already passed on completely. Still, one lingering presence remains. That surviving trace responds as his necromancy draws it out from the darkness. He identifies it as a soul still trapped by unresolved regret. Elsewhere in the hall, a woman worries about how Heinkel would react if he discovered what is happening here. Klein sets down his lantern and commits himself to the ritual. With a brief pause to steady himself, he prepares to begin. He acknowledges the act as a grave offense against his own ancestor, but proceeds anyway for the family's sake. Calling to the unfortunate soul bound by its past deeds, he offers guidance forward and proposes a contract. He tells the spirit that if it wishes to walk that path, it must accept his pact. The blue flames surge around the tomb as the ritual takes hold. Outside, the mausoleum answers with a supernatural disturbance beneath the moonlit sky. A new presence descends, signaling that the soul has manifested rather than simply obeyed. The spirit immediately recognizes Klein's art and demands that the necromancer reveal himself. The force of that presence bursts through the chamber, making clear this is no ordinary dead man. Klein concludes that the former duke truly earned his reputation, having absorbed every remnant of demonic energy into himself. The night itself seems to tremble under the pressure of what has awakened. Klein identifies the being before him as a death knight. He recalls that such a soul can only be contracted in two ways: by crushing it with overwhelming demonic power or by winning its willing cooperation. As the blazing undead knight fully appears, Klein realizes why his grandfather sent him here. The answer is staggering. This is Archimedes of the Rhinelands. The spirit before him is none other than the former Duke of Rhineland, reborn as a death knight. The silver-haired young man knows the spirit before him can see through disguises, so he openly admits he is Archimonde and reminds it that he already offered terms through a contract. The blue flame-like being rejects the offer as absurd, because as a ruler tied to Rhineland it cannot trust the bloodline of its family's ancient enemy. With trust impossible, the standoff gives way to violence as the two close the distance across the frozen ground. The battlefield erupts under their clash, turning the negotiation into a lethal test. Archimonde meets the spirit head-on, smiling despite the danger as their weapons and power collide at close range. He insists he will prove his sincerity in battle and make good on his promise to free the being. The spirit answers with cold amusement, invoking the knightly belief that trust is forged through the sword. Archimonde internally mocks the hypocrisy of hearing about knightly trust from a force tied to a desecrated ancestral grave. Their duel formally begins, no longer as a discussion but as a battle over defiance and conviction. The story shifts to the past, explaining that 2 centuries earlier Emperor Melder founded the Empire, the greatest power on the continent. Although the Empire sought dominion over the entire continent, 3 independent ducal houses remained beyond easy control. Those holdouts were Rhineland in the north, Fallwyvern in the west, and Elasis in the east. Unable to subdue them directly, the Empire spent years preparing a different method of control. That method centered on Helene, a woman tied by blood and marriage to the ruling line and placed at the head of a collateral branch. In the present, Archimonde realizes that Helene's sudden summons carries serious political meaning. While he considers the letter, his attendant Dunkel reports that preparations are complete, and Archimonde acknowledges him. Archimonde orders Dunkel to prepare for a trip to Fallwyvern within 3 days. Dunkel, reading the invitation, warns that he is not permitted to accompany him and worries whether Archimonde will be safe alone. Archimonde admits the visit is dangerous enough that one mistake could kill him, but that risk is exactly why he intends to go. He wants first-hand knowledge of Helene's intentions, her designs on him, and the current balance of power within the collateral branch. He even considers provoking conflict among Helene's own aides if matters turn bad, only for Dunkel to firmly reject that path. Dunkel challenges him morally, warning that using such methods would make him no better than the people he opposes. Archimonde dismisses the objection, arguing that harming bad people is hardly a sin, even if it violates knightly ideals. He points to the corruption of the Conwell estate, where the ruling family prospers while commoners are squeezed dry, as proof that lofty ideals ring hollow. Dunkel still refuses to yield, insisting that Rhineland must not abandon its principles and that profit bought with lost honor and faith is unworthy of a knight. When Archimonde questions whether honor and faith truly matter that much, Dunkel answers without hesitation that they do. For Dunkel, those ideals matter more than anything in the world, a conviction rooted in deep personal reverence. That absolute sincerity catches Archimonde off guard and leaves him briefly speechless. He clenches his fist and concludes that Dunkel's purity is actually a relief. Returning to the duel, Archimonde frames the reason plainly. He is an evil necromancer, so he never intended to pretend to knightly virtue. The spirit presses the attack with overwhelming force, trying to crush him before he can seize control of the fight. Archimonde reads the opening move as a straightforward thrust and prepares his response. Expecting the standard follow-up, he shifts into a counter based on patterns he has already studied. His blade cuts across the spirit's offense, disrupting the sequence and forcing a moment of surprise. The spirit praises the counter, impressed that Archimonde can keep up. It grows more intrigued, marveling that a necromancer can wield a sword with such skill. Archimonde reveals that he built this style by analyzing earlier duels, including Delian against Dalton and Heinkel against Garrison Bierkman. From those battles, he extracted the principles and mechanics behind their techniques. Now he only needs to test those ideas in real combat and master the transitions between them. The spirit dismisses theory, deciding that analysis alone means little when Archimonde is still full of exploitable gaps. It spots those openings and launches a punishing downward assault meant to break through his defense. A massive surge of power crashes down toward Archimonde, threatening to overwhelm him outright. The spirit is startled when the attack does not finish him as expected. Archimonde responds with the same instinct that guided him in an earlier life, moving decisively into a killing angle. He leaps behind the spirit, aiming to strike its back and end the duel in one blow. But the spirit reacts instantly and refuses to let him complete the maneuver. Their powers collide again in midair, blasting both apart before his finishing strike can land. Archimonde lands and immediately realizes something is wrong as his weapon gives way under the strain. The spirit finds the outcome unexpectedly interesting rather than reassuring. It recognizes the true surprise. Archimonde has been blocking its mana-based attacks with a body that contains no mana at all. The blue-haired swordsman is told he has real talent, and he stays silent while sizing up the weight of that praise. His opponent is revealed as Rudo Rhineland, the 6th Duke of the Rhineland family, and the man who once held the title of strongest knight on the continent. What made Rudo legendary was not rank alone, but a singular swordsmanship no one else could truly reproduce. As the young fighter thinks through the situation, he realizes Rudo's rough, taunting manner clashes strangely with the dignity expected of a former duke. He dismisses Rudo's heir as hopelessly clueless, judging that the son inherited only his father's foolishness. Rudo takes the insult as proof of kinship and mockingly suggests the boy may indeed share his blood. Dropping the banter, Rudo's focus sharpens and the fight turns serious. Rudo declares he will stop holding back and unleashes his full technique. The swordsman is jolted when he recognizes the move as Rudo's lost and notoriously complex style. Moonlit energy floods the field as the attack begins to take shape around them. Rudo's phantom sword scatters false trajectories so convincingly that the real strike becomes impossible to identify at a glance. The technique erupts in full, surrounding the battlefield with overlapping blades. The young swordsman steadies himself, understanding that every path he sees is false except one. He abandons simple reaction and tries to predict the true attack before it lands. He reads the first threat as a horizontal cut from the right and moves to answer it. He immediately prepares for the next angle, expecting a follow-up from the left. In an instant he realizes his sequence is wrong, because Rudo has already shifted outside that pattern. The true blade drops from above, catching him off guard. The strike slams down with crushing force before he can complete his defense. The impact blasts the ground apart and throws both fighters through the burst of energy. Recovering mid-motion, he understands the opening exchange was only a feint and braces for a far more chaotic combination. He predicts the next attack will come from behind and turns to meet it. But another discrepancy in the pattern makes him hesitate at the worst possible moment. Rudo closes in from below his blind spot, forcing the swordsman upward and off balance. Rudo follows by driving a heavy blow through the opening he created. The sudden kick sends the young fighter flying before he can recover his footing. He is hurled across the field in a streak of blue light. He crashes hard into the ground, the landing tearing up the earth around him. He rises in pain and coughing, but his mind is already analyzing what just hit him. He confirms that this is Rudo's phantom sword and realizes the mana sustaining Rudo's spirit form is far beyond that of an ordinary knight. Rudo warns him not to underestimate northern swordsmanship, stressing that this brutal technique was beyond even his own children. He adds that not even the continent's strongest necromancer could decipher it, making the challenge sound effectively impossible. Bleeding and winded, the young swordsman decides he can no longer hide what he is capable of. He answers by declaring that he too will fight seriously from this point on. With strange power gathering in his eyes, he reveals that he has already witnessed this technique closely enough to understand it. He goes further and dismisses Rudo's masterpiece as something not even especially difficult. Rudo is enraged by the claim and insists this is not a skill anyone can copy after seeing it once. The field falls into a tense stillness as both sides prepare to prove their words. They face each other at a distance, the pause turning into a silent contest of resolve. Rudo gathers power again, ready to overwhelm the boy before imitation becomes possible. The young swordsman remains calm, sword poised, as if he has already found the answer. Rudo senses that confidence, and narrows his focus on the threat in front of him. The boy's gaze hardens in return, showing he is no longer merely defending. Rudo launches another phantom sword, sending multiple false blades surging outward. This time the young swordsman answers with his own purple-edged version of the same scattered trajectories. Rudo is stunned to see his signature technique mirrored back at him, almost perfectly. The copied phantom sword collides head-on with the original, turning the clash into a direct contest of mastery. Blue and purple blade pads tear through each other in a storm of intersecting strikes. As the exchange explodes across the field, a warning rings out for Archimonde not to grow overconfident. Rudo presses the accusation that a mere necromancer is meddling on behalf of his enemy's family, exposing the deeper allegiance behind the boy's power. In the middle of their clash, someone demands to know why the white-haired young man would attack the devil of the continent at all. The accusation jolts him, forcing him to confront the absurdity of having struck at such a being. The violence abruptly falls away, leaving only the moonlit field and the aftermath of that impulsive blow. He steadies himself and faces the spirit without backing down. The two now stand apart in a tense pause, no longer fighting but measuring each other. The spirit presses him for the real reason behind his action. It points out that he could have avoided the attack entirely, making clear that the young man chose this confrontation. That challenge brings back the ideals he had once spoken of, honor and loyalty. He recalls having dismissed those ideals as pathetic, believing a life spent harming others had stripped him of any right to value them. His memory returns to bloodshed and the brutal path that shaped that cynicism. But he also remembers seeing someone endure the same pain while choosing the opposite path for the sake of children and the future. He rejects outside judgment and admits he only wants to see for himself whether that promised future is real. What drives him now is not faith, but the need to verify that hope with his own eyes. The spirit listens in silence, weighing that answer. It reveals that it lingers in the world because of unresolved regrets, though it refuses to explain what those regrets are. Still, it suggests that this boy may hold the answer it has been seeking. The spirit concludes that the future he seeks may indeed exist and addresses him by name, Rudel Rhineland. On that basis, it offers him a contract. The proposal catches Rudel off guard. Then he accepts it with a faint, confident smile. He answers that resolving regrets is exactly his kind of work and prepares to seal the deal. As the ritual begins, he mentally reviews the terms. This is a subordinate contract, and he must not mistake it for a full master bond. The spirit formally entrusts its shrouding and resentment to the guide. Rudel, as the guide archman, declares that he will inherit that burden from the deceased. They complete the reciprocal vow, with Rudel guiding the dead spirit until its desire is fulfilled, and the spirit serving him until then. The pact culminates in the spirit becoming his sword. Under the full moon, the contract's power settles into the night. Now transformed, the spirit asks whether the boy can bear the consequences of turning it into this. Rudel brushes the concern aside, saying the dead need not worry about the living. With the contract complete, the 6th Duke, Rudel Rhineland, gains the Death Knight and offers respect to his aunt. Elsewhere, a red-haired girl sleeps soundly, unaware of what has just happened. Even in her sleep, her thoughts drift toward food and nonsense rather than danger. She jolts awake shouting about teriyaki cookies, turning the mood abruptly ridiculous. Realizing it was only a dream, she sits there in groggy silence. Moments later, she collapses right back into sleep. Morning arrives at the estate as preparations are made to depart for Palawyvern. Rudel is found asleep with a book covering his face. The maid wakes him to announce that everyone is ready, though his condition makes her wonder if he has died in his sleep. He rises sluggishly, clearly not recovered. Privately, he admits that forming the Death Knight contract drained all his demonic energy 3 days earlier and left him utterly exhausted. He explains that his body is operating at less than half capacity, and that he only needs enough rest to endure the trip. The maid remains unconvinced and points out that his strange sluggishness has lasted for days. He tries to pass it off as simple lack of sleep, but even he knows the excuse is weak. She immediately calls him a liar and demands to know what he could possibly be doing at night. Rudel worries she has figured him out, then hurriedly claims he was only doing research. She exposes the lie by showing that his book is still open to the same page as before. When she reveals that the page is about the Death Knight summoning circle, his panic spikes and her suspicion hardens. Before he can recover, an older man enters and sternly asks what Rudel has been doing alone at night, especially behind both his and Sir Duke's backs. The newcomer waits in heavy silence, making clear that this is now a serious matter. Recognizing Master Klein, Rudel freezes while the maid stands by with the incriminating book in hand. Klein realizes in alarm that Dekil is about to uncover far more than he should. As Dekil starts to explain himself, Klein panics because if his secret is exposed, Dekil might conclude he transformed Arnagost into a Death Knight. Klein flashes to Dekil's earlier certainty that he was Archmond and his threat to purify him, reminding him how dangerous that misunderstanding would be. Determined to stop that conclusion from forming, Klein cuts in before Dekil can say more. He abruptly places a hand on Dekil, trying to control the conversation before it goes any further. Instead of accusing him, Klein calmly frames the situation as nothing shameful, steering it in a completely different direction. Dekil is caught off guard and briefly thinks Klein is letting the matter drop. That reassurance only confuses him more as he tries to understand what Klein is implying. Klein immediately turns to Lady Erin and begins feeding her a careful explanation meant to redefine Dekil's condition. He claims Dekil is simply going through an important stage of life. Erin hesitates, but Klein doubles down and tells her this should be expected from now on. When she worries that Dekil will keep looking so drained, Klein insists it is a perfectly natural phenomenon. He bluntly attributes it to pent-up energy from puberty, turning the whole issue into adolescent embarrassment instead of dark magic. Dekil is horrified by the misunderstanding, while Klein keeps insisting he understands and tells him not to worry. Klein even presents it as a normal rite of passage for young men, smugly trying to settle the matter. Dekil explodes in protest, furiously denying it, and resenting how absurdly his sleepless nights are being interpreted. Ignoring the outrage, Klein decides this is good news worth reporting to the Duke and starts to leave. He justifies it by saying an escort knight should share such developments, and hints there is another reason as well. That reason is that Deline once went through the same phase, which leaves Dekil mortified by the comparison. Klein takes his leave before Dekil can recover from the humiliation. Still seething, Dekil regrets not turning Klein into a Death Knight after all, while Erin prepares to depart with him. He rushes after Klein, desperate to stop him from spreading this story, but when he bursts out, he nearly collides with Leia and his anger dies mid-sentence. Recognizing her, he is thrown off balance at her sudden appearance. Leia states she has come personally to pick him up. Dekil remembers he had agreed to visit Grand Duke Hellion today, and is unsettled that Leia herself came instead of an ordinary attendant or knight. He immediately suspects she may have overheard the humiliating exchange inside. Leia shuts that down, saying she has no interest in his private affairs. As they set out because Hellion is waiting, Dekil reads the situation politically and realizes Hellion is using the Fallwyvern family's lady like a mere errand runner. Seeing how openly Hellion is asserting control over the collateral branch, Dekil decides he needs to make his own presence felt before this faction becomes a larger threat. On the ride, he even considers using Rudel if necessary, only to be interrupted by a new complication. Leia joins his carriage, and when he asks about Eren and the second coach, the arrangement immediately feels deliberate. He learns Eren chose to ride a horse instead, leaving him startled that she would do that at all. Dekil tries to switch carriages and leave Leia behind, but she flatly refuses. She overrides him and orders the carriage to depart at once. Dekil is stunned by how decisively she takes control. The door shuts, trapping them together in the moving carriage. Now alone with him, Leia sits in silence while Dekil realizes this meeting is no accident. The narration explains that the Fallwyvern family, one of the continent's 3 great houses descended from the Dragon Slayer, fractured after the late Duke's sudden death. One side became the Grand Duchess faction centered on the late Duke's second wife, Hellion of Rhineland. The other was the conservative faction led by the eldest daughter Leia, commander of the Blue Holy Spear Knights, though Hellion's rise has left her holding little real power. Acting under Hellion's orders, Leia abruptly tells Dekil to take off his clothes. She offers no explanation, letting the demand hang in the tense silence between them. Dekil can only ask why, unsure whether she is serious. As the carriage rolls on, he privately wonders why everyone seems intent on making this day unbearable. The atmosphere reminds him exactly of their last charged encounter, making him suspect this is another test of some kind. He questions why a knight commander is acting like this instead of simply escorting him, but Leia repeats that she is not joking. Realizing she is probing for something, Dekil refuses to comply without an explanation. Leia finally begins to reveal her purpose by asking whether he knows what has been happening outside the Rhineland territory lately. She explains that people have started displaying impossible physical strength, enough to crush stone barehanded and perform feats that defy common sense. Klein questions the Knight Commander's theory that his unusual strength is some kind of magic, and wonders why that would require him to undress. She explains that despite his soft-looking hands, he defeated a knight through swordsmanship, so she suspects he shares the same abnormal strength as certain others. The clue she is chasing is a physical trait. Those people tend to have irregular blue veins, and she wants to see whether his body shows the same sign. Klein is caught off guard by the idea, but realizes she has gone this far to investigate him and decides it is safer to cooperate than resist. To justify himself, he argues that people can change, implying that present ability does not have to match what others once knew of him. He expands on that point by comparing growth to ordinary life, where even dramatic differences can emerge over time. Klein insists that swordsmanship can improve quickly with talent, effort, and the right guidance, so his skill alone proves nothing supernatural. The commander counters that everything changes, pressing him to accept that his current self may reveal truths his past did not. Klein abruptly turns her logic back on her by pointing out that, despite all her talk of change, she is still shorter than him. He keeps going, mocking her unchanged build and reducing her to a narrow-shouldered runt just to throw her off balance. Seeing her falter, Klein remembers she had promised him a reward if he won the duel and pushes the conversation toward that vulnerable point. When the possibility of a kiss comes up, the commander visibly loses her composure, confirming to Klein that he has found a weakness. He presses the claim until the argument stops being about his body at all and becomes a flustered denial she can no longer control. As she struggles to recover authority, Klein realizes he has successfully seized the initiative and left even a knight commander unable to steer the exchange. He drives the advantage further by demanding that if she wants him to strip, she should go first, turning her own pressure back on her. The room falls into an awkward silence as both sides pause, the confrontation having shifted completely in Klein's favor. Elsewhere, a red-haired maid notices something amiss and reacts with sudden concern. A carriage carrying Klein's party continues on, and someone wonders what problem has interrupted the ride. Back in the room, the commander regains her seriousness and tells Klein to listen carefully before she explains herself. She reveals that she came under Grand Duke Hellion's direct orders to investigate him and had no personal desire to pry into his body, only a duty to clear her suspicions before reporting to the capital. Klein asks what she will do if her suspicions prove false, forcing her to state the cost of being wrong. She answers without evasion that she will apologize sincerely and accept full responsibility for the insult she has shown him. That answer makes Klein stop and reconsider her, because she is offering more than a casual excuse. He latches onto her promise of responsibility, clearly intending to remember and use it later. The scene shifts to the Fallwyvern estate, where Klein arrives at the powerful ducal residence. The maid steps onto the estate grounds, marking the party's entrance into a far grander world than expected. She is immediately overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the estate. Klein confirms her impression, treating the grandeur as undeniable rather than exaggerated. He judges the estate to be several times larger than his own family's holdings. Its opulence leaves him convinced that the place practically radiates wealth. As he takes in the palace-like architecture, Klein realizes the Fallwyvern family's power is far greater than he had understood. While they look around, Klein notices the knight commander is gone, and a servant approaches him directly. Hearing his family name spoken, Klein turns at once, alert to the fact that someone here has been expecting him. The man introduces himself as Gordon, chief butler of the Fallwyvern ducal estate, formally acknowledging Klein's arrival. Klein returns the courtesy and identifies himself, while the maid is introduced as his family's young attendant. Gordon welcomes them inside with the calm assurance of someone acting on prepared instructions. He leads them into the vast hall and informs Klein that Grand Duke Hellion is already waiting for him. As they pass through the gathering, nearby nobles begin to notice Klein's presence and murmur over the unexpected guest. Gordon remarks that it has been a very long time since anyone from the Rhineland ducal line last visited, making Klein's appearance politically significant. He adds that the late Duke had been deeply concerned about this matter before his death and suggests that Klein's arrival may change many things. Klein questions what he means, but privately notes that a man so close to the late Duke would not speak this way to a stranger without reason. That thought leads Klein to wonder whether Gordon already sees him as a potential ally within the estate. Just as Klein begins asking how the late Duke died, an unseen voice interrupts to announce that he has finally arrived. The sound of approaching steps shifts the mood at once, signaling the entrance of someone important enough to halt every other conversation. The newcomer recognizes Klein on sight and remarks that he bears a striking resemblance to his mother. The surrounding guests are startled that the Grand Duke has come out personally to receive him, confirming Klein's importance in their eyes. A guard calls the room to attention, ending the whispers and forcing the gathering into formal order. With the Grand Duke's approach announced, the assembled nobles bow and salute before her authority. Gordon bows as well, while Klein remains composed and faces the moment without outward hesitation. Klein studies the situation in silence, measuring the Grand Duke's interest in him and the political weight of this meeting. A woman's arrival is framed with quiet authority, signaling that someone important has come to receive Klein. Inside a grand hall, Klein is brought before a powerful figure while onlookers keep their distance and watch the meeting unfold. He is formally welcomed by Hellion, the head of the collateral branch, and his aunt, who makes clear that this is a family summons with political weight. Klein recalls the darker reason he came, returning in his mind to the contract that bound him to a dangerous purpose. That agreement is brought back into focus as he remembers being told that one clause matters more than he first realized. The contract's true aim was not just restoring Rhineland, but leading him to the person tied to that goal. Archimonde had revealed that the person Klein was meant to confront was Hellion's daughter, now his enemy. Back in the palace, Hellion stands above him and calls him closer, asserting control from the start. Her identity is laid bare. Hellion is Heinkel's older sister, married into the Fallwyvern ducal house and rose into the Empire's highest circles. After her husband's death, she sided with the Empire, seized power there, and helped bring down the main Rhineland family. Now established as leader of the collateral branch, she personally beckons Klein forward as if claiming kinship and authority at once. The hall murmurs over Klein's appearance, making it clear he has been hidden away for years and is now a subject of curiosity. A maid tries to stay by Klein's side, but he is too focused on the tension around him to indulge her. To clear the room around him, he sends her off toward the dessert table with a simple distraction. She eagerly runs off, leaving Klein to face the gathering alone, while he notes how quickly the sweets will disappear. The scene shifts fully into the imperial setting, emphasizing the scale of the power Hellion now commands. A lavish banquet has been prepared, turning what should be a family reunion into a calculated political audience. Klein takes in the feast without comfort, recognizing that the hospitality is part of the pressure being placed on him. Hellion has him seated beside her, while Hector Ross Fallwyvern, heir to the ducal house, stands close enough to show his stake in the meeting. Hector's displeasure is obvious, marking Klein's presence as an intrusion into a balance he does not want disturbed. As Klein sits, he realizes Hector is Hellion's son and immediately understands why the man resents him. A warning from Archimonde resurfaces in Klein's mind, jolting him into greater caution. Archimonde had insisted Klein must prevent him from being forced to strike down his own daughter, making the contract's urgency personal. Klein realizes Archimonde may have entered this arrangement without fully understanding it, while Hellion notices his unease. The servants politely offer Klein a way out if he feels unsafe, which only confirms how tense and dangerous the room really is. Klein senses armed force and hidden hostility all around him, as though violence could break out at any moment. In his mind, the entire hall feels like a trap of drawn blades aimed at him from every direction. Hellion shifts tactics and speaks warmly of how much he has grown, steering the conversation toward family and memory. She tells him he resembles his mother Claire, testing whether sentiment can soften his guard. Klein refuses the bait, admitting he barely remembers his mother, and making clear that flattery will not win him over. Hector bristles at Hellion's approach, but Klein openly challenges her to speak plainly instead of trying to charm him. Hellion answers by revealing this was never about affection, she is offering him a choice. Her proposal is direct: leave Rhineland behind and join her side. To strengthen the offer, she recounts Klein's recent victories and shows that she has been closely tracking his rise. She emphasizes that he achieved those feats through his own strength, appealing to his pride and independence. Klein pushes back by asking what becomes of Rhineland, reminding her that the collateral branch abandoned the main family when it mattered most. He accuses her of asking him to throw away his homeland and become a servant of the Empire. Hellion rejects that framing and argues that before the Emperor, even great ducal houses were insignificant, so survival required adaptation. Using wine as an example, she argues that being absorbed into something larger does not mean being erased. Klein listens in silence as she insists that what is submerged can still endure. She goes further, claiming that what seems lost may one day change the whole current, revealing her ambition beneath the calm. Klein sees through her performance, recognizing that her gentleness hides the ruthless woman known as the Queen of the Collateral Branch. Hector also reacts sharply, disturbed by how far Hellion is willing to go for Klein. Ignoring her son's discomfort, Hellion tells Klein not to waste himself on a doomed family, and promises him something more valuable than wealth, or even life. That promised reward is time. She explains that even the strongest eventually fall before age, but her power can defy that fate. Hellion offers to share that power with Klein if he becomes hers, turning the invitation into both temptation and claim. Klein is shaken because she speaks with too much confidence to dismiss, and he begins to wonder whether her offer is real. He admits he is not even sure whether his attachment to Rhineland comes from duty or something more personal, but he still cannot accept her logic. Instead, he answers with contempt, comparing her betrayal to someone casually breaking what belongs to another. A woman's attention sharpens as the tense exchange at the table takes an unexpected turn. The white-haired guest calmly admits he had expected hostility from the family but not outright rejection, revealing he had still hoped for some acceptance. That admission stings the other woman, who is angered less by the insult than by being denied the response she expected. The white-haired man answers with cool superiority, treating her outrage as just another unpleasant lesson she will have to endure. Hector rises from his seat, no longer willing to let the insult pass. He advances across the floor with open hostility, turning the dinner into a confrontation. He closes in on the seated guest across the laden table, making his challenge direct and personal. The white-haired man notices the threat immediately and measures Hector without flinching. Hector's own gaze hardens as he prepares to force submission. He addresses the guest by name, Klein Rhineland, making clear this is now a formal humiliation. Hector orders him to kneel and beg forgiveness from his mother, promising leniency only if he submits at once. Instead of yielding, Klein mocks Hector as a pampered son still ruled by his mother, catching him off guard. Klein presses the insult further, dismissing Hector's devotion as something a spoiled noble would praise. He twists the knife by saying Hector could never understand his position because he grew up with a mother while Klein did not. The tension snaps as Klein's contempt spills into action at the table. Hector freezes for a beat, stunned that Klein would answer him this way. Klein seizes a knife and fork and lectures Hector on manners, deliberately treating him like an unruly child. The entire hall falls into a strained silence as the insult lands in front of everyone. Hector can barely believe this younger-looking man is claiming authority over him. Klein shuts him down, insisting he is far older and ordering Hector to stop talking back. Before Hector can explode further, his mother intervenes from the head of the table and commands him to stop. Hector restrains himself and apologizes to her, but he still insists Klein has insulted the Duchess and deserves punishment. Even while obeying, Hector decides he must at least cripple Klein for the offense. He acts on that impulse with sudden violence, smashing through the table and launching the fight into chaos. As debris and silverware fly, Hector drives forward with lethal intent. He snatches up a fork as an improvised weapon, adapting instantly in the middle of the wreckage. Hector hurls the utensils like projectiles, trying to pin Klein down before he can recover. Klein draws his blade in one smooth motion, meeting the attack without panic. He cuts the incoming projectiles out of the air, proving he is far more dangerous than Hector assumed. Klein immediately counters and forces Hector onto the defensive, turning the assault back on him. Their blades clash head-on as Hector tries to overpower him through brute aggression. Klein slips around that pressure with cleaner technique, redirecting the exchange in his favor. He circles inside Hector's reach and keeps control of the rhythm, exposing the gap between Hector's rage and his own discipline. Klein acknowledges that Hector's reputation as heir is not empty, but concludes that skill alone will not save him. He suddenly changes levels and movement, catching Hector off guard. Using that opening, Klein gets behind him and breaks Hector's balance completely. He slams Hector down hard, ending the duel's momentum in a single decisive reversal. With Hector pinned against the ruined feast, Klein coldly concludes that his aunt was right and that his time matters more than Hector's life. He explains that having only recently awakened after a long absence has made time unbearably precious to him. Because of that, he cannot tolerate Hector wasting it with petty noble arrogance. Klein makes his logic brutally clear. If Hector's life has less value than Klein's time, killing him would be simpler. Hector finally understands the threat is real, but before Klein can finish it, a commanding voice stops the fight. A massive armored knight appears behind Klein and halts him with a hand on his shoulder, asserting overwhelming authority. The man identifies himself as Sanchez, Hulyen's direct knight, and orders both young men to return to their seats in the Duchess's presence. The wrecked banquet and sudden stillness make clear that the adult's authority has reasserted itself over the chaos. Klein realizes he had not even sensed Sanchez approach until the knight physically restrained him, a sign of the gap between them. The black-haired woman watches in silence, taking in the outcome without intervening further. Klein reigns in his anger, admitting to himself that losing control before his mother would only create more trouble for everyone. He releases Hector and abandons the kill, choosing restraint over escalation. Hector rises shakily and accepts the reprieve as Helene's mercy, while Sanchez stands over both of them to ensure the conflict ends there. A young noble suddenly grabs a hidden dagger and lunges at someone in white. As he drives in for the kill, he insists he is not the true target. The blade closes in on a silver-haired boy before he can react. Leia intercepts the attack at the last instant, shielding the boy and disrupting the assassin's strike. The failed attacker is jolted by the intervention. The silver-haired boy realizes the woman who saved him is someone he has encountered before. Leia identifies herself and makes clear she has come to answer for violence that happened in the carriage involving Klein. The scene shifts to the Grand Ducal residence where this reckoning is taking place. The boy connects her words to their earlier encounter and begins to understand why she stepped in. He recalls that she had already promised to take responsibility for that offense. Meanwhile, the would-be killer regains himself, unsettled that Leia protected the very person he expected to be punished. He realizes she is acting not as a private individual but with the authority of the Fallwyvern family. Leia coldly rebukes him for attacking a guest and invoking family authority he has no right to wield. She cuts deeper by reminding him that he was the one publicly subdued. The insult lands hard, leaving him stunned. Leia's intervention escalates until another woman orders Hector to stop. The hostess, Grand Duchess Helene, reminds everyone this was meant to be a civilized gathering. With a single warning, Helene imposes overwhelming pressure and makes clear Hector is humiliating himself. Hector is instantly cowed by her presence. The silver-haired boy senses just how completely Helene has seized control of the room. Leia formally apologizes to the Grand Duchess for the disturbance, but Helene dismisses the apology and focuses on Leia instead. Helene warns that she will remember whom Leia chose to protect. Leia answers with strict professionalism, stating that the Blue Holy Spear Knights exist to protect guests, and asking for understanding. Without lingering on the conflict, she turns to her knights and addresses them as commander. She orders them to prepare for training tomorrow, reasserting discipline and authority. As the knights obey, the silver-haired boy finally understands that Leia is the first princess of Fallwyvern and commander of the Blue Holy Spear Knights. Her full status is laid bare as she stands before her assembled order. Once the formalities end, she leaves the hall under the weight of that reputation. The story follows her into the quiet of her private quarters. She dismisses everyone and retreats alone to her room. The moment the door closes, her rigid public composure begins to crack. Exhausted, she tells herself she survived another day and wonders whether her father would think she performed well. The silence gives her no comfort. Unable to bear the strain any longer, she decides to relieve her stress in secret. Despite her fame as a cold and formidable noblewoman, she hides a private side no one suspects. She reveals that secret by opening a concealed space in her room. What she has hidden away is something she approaches with eager anticipation. The sight of it immediately brightens her mood. Her hidden chamber is a shrine-like collection devoted entirely to Lord Archimonde. It turns out Leia is an intense admirer of Archimonde. She has spent years gathering and even drawing portraits of him herself. She has also collected relic-like necromancy items associated with him. Her obsession extends to circular portraits, biographies, and every kind of memorabilia she can find. Her favorite treasure is a custom double-sided Archimonde body pillow. Clutching it, she slips into adoration and imagines Archimonde praising her efforts and promising her his enemies' heads. Even in her devotion, she complains that official depictions of him are inconsistent, forcing her to redraw them to match her ideal. She proudly embraces the fact that her version of Archimonde is tailored exactly to her taste. From her perspective, the pillow seems to come alive and gently soothe her. The fantasy overwhelms her so completely that she nearly collapses from excitement. Her outburst carries through the room, leaving nearby attendants outside the door baffled by the noise. Leia quietly prepares for bed in her room. Holding a pillow as if embracing someone absent, she confesses that while the world brands that person a devil of the continent, she envies them for having lived freely to the end. Her grief sharpens into regret that this person vanished before she was even born. What she wants most is the chance to have met them even once. That private longing is cut short when someone calls her name from outside, startling her. She hurriedly composes herself, worried that being seen like this would damage her authority as commander. The visitor turns out to be Klein, who asks to come in. Before answering, Klein reflects that although Leia treats him like a child, she did save him, so he should at least thank her. When Leia opens the door and bluntly asks why he is there, Klein is thrown off by how direct she is. Leia studies him while recalling the rumors that he is Lord Archman's reincarnation. Klein dismisses the gossip around his appearance and lineage as secondary and focuses on the one thing that truly matters about him. What convinced Leia was the way he looked at his opponent during the trial by combat. To her, that gaze belonged to someone selecting prey rather than merely fighting. She concludes that, as a Rhineland by blood, Klein is someone she cannot afford to underestimate. Their tense meeting is interrupted when a maid named Leia bursts in, marveling at the Night Lady's room. The commander immediately objects, insisting she never gave permission for the girl to enter. Klein uses the interruption to offer his thanks directly. Leia awkwardly accepts, explaining that if she had not stepped in earlier, things could have become much worse for him. Even as she says it, she worries she may have overstepped when she only meant to greet him. Klein shifts the conversation by proposing a deal, saying he gathered information from Gordon before coming. He reveals that the former Duke of Fallwyvern's death may not have been natural after all. According to the information he received, the case was officially called an illness, but the circumstances are suspicious, especially since Grand Duchess Hellion was alone with the Duke when he died and now holds the will. That revelation ties Hellion directly to the death of Leia's father. Klein points out that he and Leia now share the same enemy and suggests exchanging what each of them needs. He offers to become the justification Leia lacks to move against Hellion, if Leia gives him information and support in return. Klein clarifies that he is not asking for a full alliance between their families, only temporary cooperation against a common foe. He presses her to accept, arguing that neither of them has anything to lose. When Leia steps close and asks whether there is anything else he wants, Klein loses his composure for a moment. The maid, oblivious to the tension, notices his silence and innocently calls attention to it. Leia then confronts Klein more seriously, realizing he must have heard about her father beforehand and came already certain she would agree because of her hatred for Hellion. Her anger rises at the thought that he approached her as someone easy to exploit. She accuses him of not seeking partnership at all, but simply trying to use her. In her eyes, Klein is exactly the kind of man who sees another person's pain and immediately calculates how to profit from it. The accusation lands hard when she compares him to Hellion. Leia's glare makes clear that she means every word. Before the confrontation can escalate further, the maid suddenly calls out to Klein. She proudly presents something she found in the room. It is a crude handmade frog doll. Leia panics because she recognizes it as Archman's handmade doll, while Klein only sees an ugly toy and fails to grasp why it matters. The maid starts to walk off with it, still thinking it is just a frog, and Leia rushes after her in alarm. Leia snatches the doll back and insists it is genuinely important. Klein is baffled that such a shabby rag doll could matter so much. Then something about it catches his attention. As he asks to inspect the doll, the maid refuses and instead reaches for a hanging cord nearby. Leia realizes too late that letting the maid pull it would be disastrous and tries to stop her. The maid pulls the cord anyway. A hidden mechanism activates overhead. The room transforms, revealing a concealed chamber lined with shelves, books, artifacts, and framed items. Staring into the secret room, the maid notices something strange on display. What she has found appears to be a man's face, exposing an even more disturbing secret hidden in Leia's room. In a dim room lined with books and odd keepsakes, attention settles on a strange doll displayed among the clutter. A silver-haired young man recoils at the doll's ugliness, then abruptly realizes it may be connected to something far more personal. The possibility hits him hard enough that he starts piecing together an explanation he does not want to believe. As the thought sinks in, disbelief gives way to dread because the answer seems too awful to deny. He finally lands on the humiliating conclusion that the grotesque figure is supposed to be him. A maid cheerfully presents the bizarre pillow version of him to her young master, making the insult impossible to ignore. Nearby, a blonde woman is mortified on his behalf and on her own, reacting as if the sight itself is an assault. Her panic deepens as she realizes this ridiculous object exposes something private and embarrassing. She spirals into shame, convinced that her secret feelings and personal life have been laid bare for everyone to see. What truly horrifies her is the thought that this spectacle destroys the dignity she holds as the Knight Commander. Meanwhile, the young man stares at the pillow in stunned disbelief, still struggling to accept that this mockery is meant to represent him. His shock turns into outrage, and he demands that Lot explain why his face has been turned into such a pathetic object. He moves to destroy it on the spot, unable to tolerate the insult any longer. Before he can follow through, the blonde commander lunges in and strikes him to stop him. Flustered and tearful, she warns him not to touch it, revealing that she is far more invested in the thing than she wants to admit. The blow leaves him stunned, his anger interrupted by the sudden physical shock. Touching his reddened cheek, he can only stare in confusion at her desperate reaction. Outside, a violent storm crashes over the castle, underscoring the turmoil inside. Elsewhere, an older woman stirs in visible distress, as if awakened by pain or a troubling presence. In a dark chamber, someone senses that presence and asks why, as another figure stands before them. The answer comes with alarm when the figure is recognized as Mother.